Chapter 1661. Kang Shintong lowered her head timidly. There's no room for discussion. You're still young and don't understand. It's late, go and rest. Lu Zheng ordered for her to be driven away. Kang Shintong knew she had said something wrong and looked nervous and afraid. She bit her lower lip so hard that a mark appeared. Here, godfather, sleep early too. Don't tire yourself out. Kang Shintong retreated. Lu Zheng stared at the candlelight in a daze. This child is still too young. Lu Zheng sighed softly as if he was lamenting. If Kang Shintong had been calmer, she would have realized that Lu Zheng didn't despise her for saying such treacherous words. He didn't even reprimand her. It could be seen that Lu Zheng wasn't completely loyal to Shui. He even had many complaints. Just as Lu Zheng had said, Kang Shintong was too young. Her thoughts were all natural and didn't know the twists and turns. Lu Zheng's personality determined that he wasn't someone who would surrender without a fight. Flattery was better than death. It was the same even if Shui was a pig. After this conversation, Lu Zheng was no different than usual. Kang Shintong, on the other hand, felt guilty and regretful. She had been too impulsive. Even though it was for her godfather's good, he had assisted Shui for so long. He couldn't just give up. Kang Shintong was regretting when a loud horn sounded outside the tent. The drums were beating like thunder, causing the sand on the ground to tremble. Her heart tightened. She secretly opened the tent's curtain and looked outside. Although she couldn't see anything from here, she could feel a murderous aura choking her throat and preventing her from breathing as she looked at the much emptier military camp and the sound of the war drums coming from afar. Kang Shintong looked at the hurried figures and murmured softly. There's another battle. Is Godfather all right? The battle had lasted from dawn to dusk. During this time, many wounded soldiers had been carried back from outside. Some of the wounded soldiers were bathed in blood and looked like blood people. Their original appearance could not be seen. Some of them had broken limbs and wreckage, and their human forms could not be seen. All of them were in so much pain that they wanted to die. Moans of pain flowed from the corners of their lips. Almost none of them had their arms or legs intact. Their bodies were covered in wounds. If she wasn't still alive, Kang Shintong would have suspected that she had come to the underworld. Kang Shintong obeyed Lu Zheng's warning and did not dare to run around. Every time the battle started, she would hide in her tent. While his heart was beating like a drum, he listened to the movements outside. Even though Jiang Pingji was her idol, she knew that once Shui was defeated, the military camp would be in danger. Not only would she be in danger, but her godfather would also meet with misfortune. Therefore, every time there was a war, she would worry for a long time, from the moment the war drums sounded until the gong sounded to retreat. He was worried that Jiang Pingji would lose and that his foster father would be in danger. She asked someone to leave some food for Lv Zheng. She cooked a small stove to keep him warm so that he could eat hot food as soon as he came back. Perhaps it was because the enemy's offensive had become much fiercer and the war was in a tight situation. Lu Zheng did not deal with his chores for the past 2 days. He was summoned by Shui for a meeting before dawn and did not return even when the moon was high in the sky. Not knowing how the battle situation was, Kang Shintong yawned next to the small stove. When she woke up, she did not see Lu Zheng return. Could it be that we've lost today? Kang Shintong recalled the number of wounded soldiers she saw during the day. The number was indeed greater than the previous few times, and it looked even more tragic. She hugged her knees and waited for a while. Finally, she heard familiar footsteps coming from outside the tent. Kang Shintong was energized and her sleepiness disappeared completely. Godfather. She called out. The tent flap was lifted. With the help of a few candles in the tent, she could barely see who it was. Why aren't you sleeping? Lu Zheng was slightly stunned. Kang Shintong had already stepped forward to welcome him. He subconsciously took a step back, but it was still too late. Kang Shintong smelled the scent of blood on his body and her expression changed drastically. Kang Shintong asked hurriedly, Is Godfather injured? Lu Zheng raised his hand to cover his left arm and shook his head. Swords have no eyes in front of a battle. It's inevitable that he will be injured. Kang Shintong said, Godfather is the military supervisor. He's in the middle of the army. How can he be injured so easily? Unless the formation of the 3 armies was broken by the enemy and the enemy rushed into their own formation, it was possible that Lu Zheng, who was heavily protected, would be accidentally injured. Lu Zheng's brows showed some fatigue. He said, Today's battle situation is not optimistic. The enemy's combat power is extremely strong while our army, he wanted to say something but stopped. In terms of the number of troops in the 3 armies, Shui undoubtedly had a great advantage. They were almost twice as many as the enemy. But, In terms of overall combat quality, the elites under Jiang Pingji's command obeyed orders strictly. Their ability to carry out battles was extremely strong, and the combat power they displayed was naturally tyrannical. Even without Jiang Pingji, who was a bug in the game, charging and killing at the front, they gradually suppressed Shui's arrogance. Lu Zheng had seen countless storms and waves, but he had never wanted to curse like he did today. Look at the enemy's combat quality, look at his own people's ability to carry out their tasks. The troops under Jiang Pingji's command used their actions to tell Shui that numbers didn't mean everything. Their quality was inferior to the enemy's, and Shui had recruited so many ordinary young men in such a short period of time who were waving flags and shouting battle cries. They had forcefully lowered the overall quality of the troops. Over the past few days, Lu Zheng had tasted what it meant to be powerless. He almost couldn't suppress his negative emotions. In his mind, he had several formations to deal with the enemy. He cooperated with the chief commander to issue military orders, but the effect was far from what he had expected. It was as if his brain was active and he tried to control his body to counterattack and defend against the enemy, but his limbs wouldn't listen to him. He was either paralyzed and stiff or he was flailing about. He could only watch helplessly as the enemy's raised blade pierced into his body. Lu Zheng had returned so late that day not only because he was injured but more importantly, because Shui had made him stay behind and reprimanded him. Everyone knew what the crux of the matter was, but no one stood up for Lu Zheng. They didn't dare to say it. What did they say? That the overall combat power of the army wasn't strong because the quality of the troops that Shui had forcibly recruited was too weak. Not only did they not increase their combat power but they were also holding them back? If they said that, it would be tantamount to questioning Shui's decision and ability. No one wanted to commit a crime when Shui was furious. Lu Zheng became the scapegoat. Of course, Shui still had a sense of propriety. Although he said it was a reprimand, he actually didn't say anything harsh. After all, his trusted aide and right-hand man Hua Yuan wasn't here. He still needed to rely on Lu Zheng now. He couldn't completely offend him and disappoint him. Kang Xintong was silent. She only brought the warm food to Lu Zheng, hoping that he would eat a little. I'm afraid that in this battle, I'll try my best to help you settle down. Jiang Pingji still didn't participate in the battle, but the army led by Fu Wang was assisted by a few famous strategists. Lu Zheng was surrounded by useless teammates. He had the heart but not the strength. Before the situation worsened, he planned to first find a way out for Kang Xintong and ensure her safety. I'm not going anywhere. Kang Xintong refused resolutely. Lu Zheng ate in silence, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Without waiting for Lu Zheng to come up with a plan, bad news arrived 2 days later. It shocked the entire army and made them anxious and uneasy. 200,000 dawn of rations had been stolen. Shui was so angry that his entire body trembled. He killed the general who was responsible for escorting the rations. In his heart, he even cursed 18 generations of Jiang Pingji's ancestors. Lu Zheng frowned slightly. Jiang Pingji, who had been in seclusion for 2 months, had appeared. She seized 200,000 dawn of rations in one move. Lu Zheng sighed and said, "It's really her style. It was fine if she didn't move, but once she did, she would kill." In response, Jiang Pingji expressed her apology. Me. Chapter 1662. Your Highness, please spare me. I'm really wronged. Lu Zheng had received the news that the rations had been robbed and hurried over, just in time to see 2 soldiers dragging the tied-up general out to be dealt with according to military law. The general knew he was going to die, but he refused to give up hope of survival. Seeing Lu Zheng's figure from the corner of his eye, he hurriedly straightened his neck and shouted, Military counselor. I'm wronged. I've been diligent in supervising the rations. I've never betrayed my lord." Hearing him shout, Lu Zheng's feet paused, his wooden clogs making a muffled sound on the gravel. The general struggled and said, "It's not my fault that the rations were leaked. Military counselor, save me. I'm really wronged. The rations were fake. They were switched long ago. I'm wronged. Military counselor, save me." Lu Zheng regained his composure after just one breath. He lifted the curtain of the main tent and bent over to enter. He was late. The tent was already filled with people, but many of them had grave expressions and didn't even notice his arrival. Shui had just ordered the execution of the general and was still angry. Seeing that Lu Zheng was late, he was even more displeased. He hadn't expected Lu Zheng's tent to be set up so far away from the commander's tent. Even if Lu Zheng had jogged all the way here, he wouldn't have arrived so quickly. Of course, as a qualified scumbag, Shui wouldn't find fault with himself. Ordering people he didn't like to come and go at his beck and call was the typical behavior of a scumbag. When there was nothing to do, he ignored Lu Zheng. When there was something to do, he spoke intimately. He suppressed his displeasure and asked for a solution in a low voice. His eyes seemed to flow with pure trust. Lu Zheng had long been used to Shui's behavior. While sighing that his lord was a drama queen and every inch of her was an actor, he bowed in shame and said, "I heard about the rations being robbed and rushed here. I didn't have time to understand the details." Shui choked, feeling even more suffocated. Seeing that Shui had nothing to say, Lu Zheng turned his head to ask the others what had happened. Shui silently swallowed the roiling scolding in his throat. He suppressed his irritation and waited for Lu Zheng to understand what had happened. 200,000 dawn of rations was not a small number, and it was also related to the army's consumption for a while, so the troops guarding the rations naturally did not dare to slack off. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, they still failed to defend against the enemy. When the grain transport army was about to arrive, they were robbed by the enemy. Everyone thought that it was Jiang Pingji's masterpiece with her execution ability. Jiang Pingji's status rose along with the tide. The things she had done were studied under a magnifying glass and analyzed over and over again. As her enemies, Shui and the others naturally knew how many things this fiend had done that made people tremble in fear just by hearing her name. After the analysis, they unanimously threw the blame to her. Little did they know that after Jiang Pingji turned over a new leaf, she did not roam the front lines anymore, let alone bring people to rob rations. It was true that the people under her command had robbed the rations, but she was not the one who had benefited from the rations. Lu Zheng was keenly aware that something was wrong. He furrowed his brows and asked the people around him. After a while, he said to Shui, "My lord, there are still doubtful points in this matter. I sincerely ask my lord to retract your order and spare General Chai's life for now." Shui almost fainted from anger. He could not suppress his temper and reprimanded Lu Zheng for having ulterior motives in front of everyone. General Chai, whom Lu Zheng had accused of collaborating with the enemy and betraying his lord, should be killed if not this kind of person? Kill Lu Zheng? Shui did not expect Lu Zheng to plead for mercy on General Chai's behalf. He was even more furious. "I sincerely ask my lord to listen to me. There are many doubtful points in this matter. My lord should treat it with caution." Lu Zheng looked like he was going by the book. His tone was indifferent. "The matter of the rations is a secret of our army. How did the enemy know so much about it and catch General Chai off guard?" Shui laughed coldly and asked in return, "This person even has a letter of collaboration with the enemy and betrayal of his lord. How do you think Lu Shi knows so much about it?" The enemy could tell at a glance that this had been planned for a long time. There must have been an insider who leaked information to them. Who else could it be other than General Chai, who had irrefutable evidence? He really did not know what was wrong with such a stupid question. Lu Zheng said, "In that case, after the rations were stolen, why didn't he take the opportunity to be captured by Lu Shi and escape from his predicament? Instead, he led an army to break out of the encirclement and pass the news to my lord, causing him to be killed in the end. Also, General Chai said that the rations were fake. What's going on?" Shui said angrily, "It's just a traitor's way of survival and framing others." Lu Zheng did not think so. When the enemy had launched a sneak attack, General Chai had tried his best to protect the rations. However, the enemy had the advantage of time, place and people. They had suddenly attacked and caught everyone off guard. With a ferocious move, the soldiers guarding the rations had been beaten senseless. General Chai had tried his best to delay the enemy but to no avail. In the end, he had no choice but to burn all the rations. They could not use them and the rations could not fall into the enemy's hands. In the end, the rations on the top were normal but the rations on the bottom were disguised. They did not contain rations at all. When General Chai discovered this, he was completely stunned. This was far more terrifying than an enemy sneak attack. Shui wanted to kill him, so he revealed this matter. In the end, no one believed him. Framing others? Framing who? Lu Zheng said in a low voice. No matter how protective the Lord is, he should not be biased at a time like this. The person in charge of the rations was Hua Yuan. If the rations Hua Yuan had prepared were real, then General Chai was the liar. On the other hand, this problematic batch of rations had been prepared by Hua Yuan. Perhaps the one who leaked the details of the rations and attracted the enemy's precise attack was Hua Yuan. After some maneuvering, this batch of 200,000 dawn of rations was rightfully taken by Hua Yuan. Of course, Shui was not the only one who did not believe this. The others did not believe it either. What would Hua Yuan gain by doing this? They did not know, but Lu Jing did. That madman's inner core was Lu Shi. What did he gain by seizing the rations and heartlessly betraying his teammates? This monster was preparing to ascend to the heavens. Of course, even if Lu Jing told the others that Hua Yuan's essence had been divided into Lu Shi, no one would believe him. Instead, they would think that he was using clumsy and underhanded methods to suppress Hua Yuan. Lu Jing could not be bothered with this thankless task. Do whatever you want. He had lost all hope in his teammates. And Shui was so angry that he was about to ascend to the heavens. What did Lu Jing mean by this? Was he reprimanding him for being biased in front of everyone? They did not know that Jiang Pingji was also very angry. The anger levels of the two feudal lords had reached a delicate balance. Jiang Pingji looked at the rations that Li Yun had snatched back, and her face darkened. Humph, Lu Xiaoyin has eaten a lot of pig's brains over the years. His brain is quite nourished. He even schemed against me. She gritted her teeth so hard that they made a ringing sound. The rations that she had spent so much effort to steal were actually fake. Her efforts had become a joke. After thinking about it, she locked her target on Lu Zheng. After all, this kind of underhanded plotting was indeed like him. No matter how big her brain was, she could not have guessed that Shui's official Hua Yuan's essence had created a Lu Shi and was secretly preparing to cause trouble. The real mastermind, Hua Yuan, stared coldly at the small porcelain bottle in his hand and smiled. What is this? The Xichang Emperor's concubine asked anxiously. Hua Yuan said, poison? The Xichang Emperor's concubine stuck out her belly and trembled. She asked fearfully, to whom? Hua Yuan laughed. Yes. The Emperor's concubine was speechless. Chapter 1663. This poison is for Shui? The Xichang Emperor's concubine knew that Hua Yuan was ambitious, but she didn't expect him to be so decisive. He actually wanted to poison Shui. No matter how bad Shui was, his trust in Hua Yuan and importance to him was unquestionable. He even valued Hua Yuan and neglected Lu Zheng. Now Hua Yuan wanted Hua Yuan dead for some unknown reason. The Xichang Emperor's concubine shuddered at the thought of it. On second thought, Hua Yuan had forced her to do something even more disgusting. It didn't seem out of line for this person to have the ambition to kill her lord. Hua Yuan glanced at the Xichang Emperor's concubine, his thin lips curving into a smile. The golden light shone on his face, forming a faint halo. He looked like a god. Xichang's emperor concubine felt even more complicated when she saw this. Heaven had given Hua Yuan an outstanding appearance, an elegant demeanor, and even extraordinary intelligence. Yet such a beautiful appearance hid such filth and filth. One could not help but sigh. As the Xichang Emperor's concubine's thoughts ran wild, she heard Hua Yuan's calm reply. Why would the side lady think that I want to poison my lord to death? My lord has treated me well. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring. The Xichang Emperor's concubine choked. Her face contorted. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring? The spring, he mentioned, was secretly transplanting a large patch of green grassland on his lord's head? Not only did he transplant the grassland, but he also manipulated it in secret. He relied on Shui's trust to tamper with the rations. She wasn't wrong. The rations that Li Yun had gone through so much trouble to rob had been intentionally given away by Hua Yuan. Only 10% of the rations were real. The other 90% were fake. Hua Yuan had secretly leaked information to lure the enemy over to rob the rations. Jiang Pingji had taken the bait and sent people to rob the rations. The 200,000 dawn of provisions were easily taken away by the enemy. Through this method, Hua Yuan managed to keep this batch of rations for himself in a justifiable manner. The Xichang Emperor's concubine and the prince felt uneasy. Hua Yuan's methods were so vicious and swift. Could they really gain even the slightest bit of advantage from him? The Empress concubine did her best to suppress the fear, worry, and fear in her heart, and forced out an extremely stiff smile. Hua Yuan had secretly embezzled a huge amount of rations and didn't even care about the lives and deaths of the frontline soldiers. Even a 3-year-old child wouldn't believe that he didn't have the intention to rebel. How could I not believe Sir's words? I misunderstood you just now. Although Emperor concubine Xichang said that, no one knew what she was thinking. I'm stupid. I hope you can give me some pointers so that I can understand. You don't know, but the Lord has been looking forward to the child in your womb for a long time. Hua Yuan stretched out his hand and used the back of his finger to caress Xichang's imperial concubine's protruding belly. The imperial concubine was so frightened by his actions that her entire body stiffened. She did not dare to move. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and her slender body trembled slightly. It was as if Hua Yuan was not using his finger but a sword to threaten her. Finally, when she realized that Hua Yuan hadn't harmed her, she heaved a long sigh of relief. She faintly felt as if she had escaped from death. But Sir knows this child isn't? Hua Yuan retracted his hand and took out a handkerchief from his sleeve to wipe his fingers. His movements were reserved and elegant, as if there was really something dirty on it. The Lord doesn't know, does he? He said indifferently. He doesn't know. The child you bear is his flesh and blood. Emperor Concubine shut her mouth because she realized that Hua Yuan's eyes were flashing with murderous intent. If she said one more thing that she didn't dare to say, she didn't doubt that the poison in Hua Yuan's hands would enter her mouth. As if he was murmuring carelessly, Hua Yuan said, "If only this child was a son. The Lord would have a successor." Emperor Concubine forced a smile. Even if it's a son, he's just a bastard son. Lang Jun still has a legitimate young master. Because Shui's body was damaged, he could no longer impregnate women. In order to appease the officials who followed him, he adopted a son from a branch family. After many years, this young master had long been recognized by the officials. Everyone treated him as Shui's successor. Even if Emperor Concubine Shichang gave birth to Shui's biological son, he would only be a bastard son. He wouldn't be able to compete with the adopted son and nominal son of the legitimate wife. When her child grew up, who knew if Shui would still be alive? After all, there was a lunatic like Hua Yuan on the inside and Jiang Pingji on the outside. And Shui was sandwiched between them. No matter how you looked at it, he seemed like a short-lived creature. Even if Jiang Pingji didn't kill Shui, the young master would have grown up after many years. How could a young child be able to compete with him? Unless... Emperor Concubine Shichang's mind spun. An extremely daring idea suddenly popped into her mind. Could it be? Her eyes widened and she took half a step back in fright. If the poison in Hua Yuan's hands wasn't prepared for Shui, then it was prepared for the young master. If the young master died, Shui would stay at the front lines and be controlled by Hua Yuan. Wouldn't his life and death be at Hua Yuan's disposal? As long as the two of them died, the child in her womb could only be used as a bargaining chip for Hua Yuan to seize power. As expected, Hua Yuan said, "Young master." Sighed Madam, "The Lord values the child in your womb more. He has long had the intention to abolish Li." Abolish Li? Yes, this is indeed the Lord's intention. The young master is a stumbling block for the child in the Side Madam's womb. A stumbling block naturally had to be kicked out. Emperor Concubine Shichang felt a chill in her heart. She didn't doubt Shui's ruthlessness. His intention to abolish Li was probably true, but whether it was Shui's idea or Hua Yuan's own decision to poison the young master was debatable. Shui was shameless, but he wasn't brainless. He favored his biological son, but before his biological son grew up, he wouldn't kick out his backup stepson early. An unborn child, no one knew how talented he was and whether he could grow up safely. In summary, this was most likely Hua Yuan's own intention. How can a woman like me understand these things? Everything will be decided by the master. Hua Yuan laughed. That won't do. I'll need a little help from the Side Madam. Emperor Concubine Shichang's eyelids twitched violently. What kind of help? Hua Yuan leaned forward and whispered a few words into her ear. Emperor Concubine's body trembled slightly. Her eyes were filled with shock and fear. This matter. Her lips trembled and she wanted to refuse, but when she saw Hua Yuan's half-smiling eyes and the murderous intent deep in them, she had no choice but to give in. Everything will be arranged by the master. Emperor Concubine held her stomach with one hand and lowered her head. Hatred and indignation that could topple mountains and overturn seas rose in her heart. It was too unbearable and humiliating to be at someone's mercy. A conspiracy quietly took shape. 2 days later, a spring rain came. The mountain mist was thick and light, and the air was filled with the fragrance of soil and spring rain. The faint sound of horse hooves approached from afar. Chapter 1664. It's a pity that you didn't come hunting today. The weather had been good these days, so the youth had asked Hua Yuan out to hunt with him. However, Hua Yuan had been troubled by the looting of rations and could only decline the youth's invitation. The youth was disappointed, but he also understood that business was more important. He didn't dare to act recklessly. Ever since Shui's side wife had gotten pregnant, the youth could clearly feel that his father treated him differently. For example, during this war, as the heir who was about to reach adulthood, he had been left behind. It was said to be for protection, but honestly, did he need such protection in troubled times? A few years ago, the youth had gone to Dongqing with his master, Hua Yuan, to seek an alliance. At that time there was no mention of protection. Why did Shui suddenly say protection when he was about to reach adulthood? On the surface, it was protection, but in reality, it was weakening the relationship between the youth and Shui's subjects. The youth wasn't stupid. He naturally realized it. However, he couldn't tell anyone about it. He could only suppress it in his heart. As an idler, and also to show his father how harmless he was, he had been addicted to hunting and pleasure. His master Hua Yuan had even lectured him seriously. Don't be addicted to pleasure and neglect your studies and government affairs. The youth could only smile bitterly. He didn't dare look up at Hua Yuan's disappointed eyes. He hadn't grown his wings yet and could only rely on Shui. Even a sneeze from Shui made his heart jump and his thoughts run wild. The only fortunate thing was that his master, Hua Yuan, was the only person who had maintained a normal attitude toward him after the incident. Because they were rare, they were precious. The youth saw how Hua Yuan treated him, so he naturally trusted and respected him even more. He looked at the prey hanging from the horse's back and seemed to think of something. The corners of his lips curled involuntarily, and his eyes curved into two crescent moons. His clear eyes were filled with a smile. He was very good looking. Even though he still looked a little young, his bearing had already been developed. Anyone who saw such an outstanding youth in the wilderness would probably think that they had seen a beautiful spirit. I'm lucky today. This wasn't a good season for hunting. The prey had just survived winter and were skinny, not as plump as they were in autumn. However, the prey today were all good. Their fur was smooth and beautiful. The youth planned to pick the best and give it to Hua Yuan. The servant who served the youth cursed his bad luck. He mumbled, "How is it good luck? We've been completely drenched." The youth looked up at the rainwater dripping down from the eaves, brushing the moss green. Although the weather was not beautiful at this time, it did not affect the youth's bright mood. He said with a smile, "It's raining and we've already come across a wooden hut. Isn't that good?" When hunters went hunting in the mountains, those who were lucky could go and return on the same day. Those who were unlucky had to wait patiently in the mountains for a few days. For the sake of convenience, they would build this kind of temporary shelter, and passers-by could also rest here. The young man was in a good mood and did not feel that the rain was inappropriate. The attendant untied the wineskin from the back of the horse and handed it to the youth with both hands. "Young master, drink some wine to warm up your body lest you catch a cold." The rain came suddenly. Even though everyone found shelter as fast as they could, they were still wet. Their clothes and hair were wet. The young man was of high status. If he fell sick because his attendants did not take good care of him, the attendants accompanying him would be in trouble. The attendant saw the young man take the wineskin and gulp it down. Only then did he feel relieved and turn around to fetch a clean set of clothes. Although the wooden hut was small, it had all the essentials. There was also a lot of dry firewood in the house, just enough to make a fire and boil water for the young man to bathe. The young man waved his hand and said, "Put the clothes aside. I'll change later. I don't want to move now." "Yes." The attendant put the clothes where the young man could reach out his hand and respectfully stepped back to guard nearby. He did not know whether it was because his alcohol tolerance was too poor, or because the wine today was especially fragrant, but the young man finished the wineskin in a few mouthfuls. His white jade-like cheeks were slightly tipsy, and the drunkenness rushed to his head. Not long after, his white jade-like cheeks were covered with a thin layer of red, and his whole body exuded the unique youthful spirit of a young man. He did not care at first but soon noticed something strange. A familiar yet strange hot wave spread from inside to outside, making his skin hot and red. He could not help but raise his hand to loosen his clothes to cool down. This feeling, the young man was a little angry. "What's with this wine?" The attendant heard the commotion and rushed over. Hearing the young man's question, he was shocked. "Young master, wasn't this wine given by Master Hua Yuan?" The young man suddenly remembered something, and his expression became slightly unnatural. It turned out that this wine was found by the young man's concubine from somewhere and given to the young man. The young man knew that it was rare wine, so he gave it to Hua Yuan. Hua Yuan had been busy with the military rations recently and had not rested for several days. He was not in the mood to taste the wine, so he asked the young man to pack most of the wine back. In other words, this problematic wine should have been done by the young man's concubine. Thinking of this, the young man's cheeks burned like a burning cloud. He was ashamed, angry, and hateful. The women in the inner residence would really do anything to be favored. Fortunately, the teacher did not drink it. If he did, he might make a fool of himself. The young man's face turned pale, then green, then purple, and finally black. The attendant was a very discerning person. He did not know what had happened, but it did not prevent him from taking the opportunity to flatter the young man. He said flatteringly, "I see that the young master looks tired. Why don't you go in and rest?" The young man felt uncomfortable, but he nodded in agreement. Just as he was about to get up, his body suddenly froze on the spot. He did not know whether he should get up or not. It was very awkward. He had been dreaming since he was 13. 2 years ago, his father and Shui had prepared 2 intelligent and beautiful concubines for him to learn about human relationships. With these experiences, he naturally knew what the changes in his body meant. He immediately became even more embarrassed. He unnaturally tightened his legs. However, he was dressed more professionally today, so the reaction under his abdomen was slightly more obvious. The attendant's sharp eyes saw the small tent under his abdomen and understood. The young man was extremely embarrassed. He ran into the farmhouse as if he was escaping and slammed the door shut. This kind of farmhouse was a place for hunters to rest. The environment was simple, but it could shelter them from the wind and rain. There were guards outside, so ordinary hunters could not enter. The young man glanced at his abdomen, and his face became even more ashen. The attendant was a clever person. He asked in a low voice, "Young master, do you want to call for someone?" "We'll see. There's no need for now." The young man replied in a hoarse voice. Even his breath was hot. The accompanying attendants were all men in their teens or 20s. There were no women. Chapter 1665. Of course, this was not an absolute rule. It was just an unspoken rule. The young man had lived in such an environment since he was a child, so he naturally understood the hints of the servants. He asked someone to prepare cold water for him, intending to soak in it to suppress the rising desire in his body. However, a basin of cold water was not enough. He could not calm down no matter how he tossed and turned. Instead, he was so hot that his whole body was restless. The young man's body was the most sensitive. The tide of passion came violently and violently. The more he endured, the more pain he felt. This was not the way to go on. The young man's whole body was hot, and his consciousness was a little blurred. He seemed to vaguely hear the creaking sound of the wooden door being opened. "Who is it?" the young man shouted in a daze. The person's footsteps were light. As the person approached, a delicate fragrance that almost made him lose his mind surrounded him. The young man opened his eyes to look, but a soft and fragrant hand covered his eyes, making him see darkness. "Langjun," faintly the person's sweet voice sounded in his ears. His sensitive earlobe was sucked by the other person's hot and wet mouth. The young man could not bear it. He raised his hand and pushed the person away, pressing her to the ground. He looked closer and saw that the other person was wearing a thin veil. Her delicate outline was hidden behind the veil, faintly discernible. Only her eyes were clear and moving. The other person seemed to be frightened by his actions. She opened her mouth slightly and let out a short scream. It was as if someone was using a soft feather to tickle the young man's heart, making him lose his mind. It was drizzling outside, but the passion in the room was intense. Not long after, there was a movement that made people blush. The young man, who was occupied by his instincts, did not notice that the person's lower abdomen was protruding, and she began to struggle and call for help. When the drizzle outside stopped, the passion in the room also came to an end. The sunset outside added a bit of a ghost. The young man woke up from his sleep and got up in a daze. He keenly noticed that something was wrong. There was another person's breathing next to him. He turned his head and saw a woman with a protruding lower abdomen and tearful cheeks lying next to him. At first glance, this person's profile was slightly familiar. The young man's memories before he fell asleep quickly came back, and the memory of the passion also flashed in front of his eyes. The young man was shocked and shivered. He recalled the appearance of the woman before her hair was scattered. It was clearly a married woman. Then he looked at her lower abdomen. The youth's face was like an overturned palette with all kinds of colors. At this time, the woman moaned and opened her eyes. When she saw the youth's appearance, she screamed and sat up. She covered her stomach with one hand and grabbed the scattered clothes to cover her body with the other. Because of this, the young man also saw the woman's appearance clearly, and it was as if he had been struck by lightning. Wasn't this person his adoptive father and Chui's side wife, the Empress concubine from Xichang, his adoptive mother? Unfilial son. How could you do such a despicable thing? Are you worthy of your father? Without waiting for the youth to come back to his senses, Princess Concubine of Xichang cried and slapped him. At that moment, Princess Concubine Xichang's maidservant barged in. She was scared out of her wits by the situation. Anyone with a discerning eye would know what had happened to the two people in the room. One was Shui's concubine and she was pregnant. The other was Shui's adopted son, currently the rightful heir. These two were mother and son in name, but now they were actually together? Princess concubine Xichang was in so much pain that she wanted to die. Her hair was messy and her exposed skin was bruised. It was obvious that she had been forced by her stepson. Because of the maidservant, the youth did not even have the chance to make up for it. There was only one thought in his mind: it's over. Ah, my stomach. Princess concubine clutched her stomach, her face pale. Both the maidservant and the youth were scared out of their wits. The maidservant hurriedly wanted to find someone to take a look at Princess concubine and protect the child in her womb. Nothing could happen to her. The scene was in chaos. The youth's servants had also been attracted by the maidservant's movements. Looking at the chaotic scene, the youth realized that he had missed a great opportunity to salvage the situation. If people knew that he had sex with his father's concubine, and that he had clearly forced himself on her while drunk, he would definitely be finished. Even if he was innocent. At that moment, the youth had already realized that this was a plot against him. He had fallen into someone's trap. Unfortunately, there were witnesses and material evidence. Even if he had mouths all over his body, he could not clear his name. At that moment, if the youth had half the decisiveness and viciousness of the mentally ill Huayuan, he could have killed Princess concubine Xichang and her maidservants. Then he could come up with an excuse. As long as there was no evidence, no one would know what he had done to Princess concubine Xichang. Although the servants knew, they were all the youth's people, so it was easy to clean them up. However, the youth was not Huayuan. He did not have the decisiveness to grasp this last opportunity. The price was that this matter would reach his master, Huayuan. If Huayuan knew, that meant that his adoptive father and Shui would know sooner or later. Sir, this student is really innocent. The youth could not defend himself. He could only hope that Huayuan would believe him. Huayuan said angrily, innocent? Bullying a concubine's mother is innocent? How many people saw what you did? The youth's face was pale. Huayuan said, I've already dealt with most of the blabbermouths who knew. This matter should be handled by the Lord herself. The youth panicked when he heard this. If Shui knew, he would definitely die. Sir, why won't you listen to me? You raised me personally. How can you not know what kind of person I am? How can your student be worse than a beast? The youth knelt on the ground and cried. This student was really set up. That pot of wine was drugged by the lowly servant in the backyard. Also, the concubine mother appeared at a very suspicious time. It must have been her. You're so stupid. Huayuan rebuked him angrily. She is pregnant with the Lord's son. Even if she sees you as a thorn in her side, she has to wait until after the baby is born. What benefit does she get from setting you up now? But because of you, the fetus in her womb is showing signs of instability. If it weren't for the doctor's superb medical skills and her good foundation, this fetus would definitely not be able to survive. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that no matter who schemes against you, she would never scheme against you. Not only can you not get away with this excuse, you even have a guilty conscience. The youth had already lost his mind. His mind was a mess and he trembled all over. Huayuan said, your attendants said that they heard a woman crying for help in the room. They went up to investigate but were scolded by you. There are witnesses and material evidence. How do you expect me to believe your words? Did you bully your concubine mother after drinking or were you set up? What I think is not important. What's important is what outsiders think and what the Lord thinks. I will tell the Lord the truth and see what the Lord decides. The youth's lips turned pale. Sir, Father, will never forgive this student. I don't want to die yet. Chapter 1666. Because of Huayuan's refusal, the youth could only leave anxiously. Before he left, he even looked back 3 times. Huayuan watched him leave but said nothing. His expression was solemn. The youth could only give up for now. Sir, what should we do now? Xichang's Empress concubine thought that Huayuan would poison the youth to death quickly. She had never expected that he would do nothing even after several days. As long as the youth did not die, Xichang's Empress concubine would live in fear. She was afraid that Huayuan would abandon her and become a useless pawn. She had followed Huayuan's instructions and walked down a path of no return. She schemed that the youth had an affair with her. If the youth and Shui did not die, she would be the one to die when the child in her womb was born. With Shui's temperament, how could he tolerate his concubine being tainted by an adopted son? If Shui found out that the child in her womb was not his, Xichang's Empress concubine would probably wish for death. She was like a drowning person, clutching tightly to the straw in her hands before she died. Xichang's Empress concubine held her obvious belly with one hand and carefully leaned against the table, afraid that something would happen to the child. I have done everything according to Sir's instructions. There is no turning back. If Sir abandons me now, I really do not know what to do. Her face was filled with tenderness. One could not help but reach out to smooth her frowning brows. Of course, this person did not include Hua Yuan. This lunatic had a heart of stone. I know, Hua Yuan said coldly. He had no intention of giving a precise reply. Sir, I am worried that a long delay will bring trouble. Although the young master is young, he is still a child personally raised by Sir and Shui. If he is not eliminated quickly, he will be a disaster. Xichang's Empress concubine did not forget to flatter Hua Yuan. Also, my pregnancy has been affected because of that matter. If he takes this opportunity to harm me, I will be so worried that I will not be able to sleep at night. She had only dared to plot against the youth according to Hua Yuan's instructions because the appearance of the fetus was already stable. In order to pretend to be more realistic, some of the struggling movements were inevitably more violent. The youth had also lost his rationality under the influence of the drug, and his movements were rough. That young and strong body made her suffer greatly, and even her stomach began to feel uncomfortable. Only then did she panic. Under Hua Yuan's threat, she had already thrown caution to the wind. However, if the youth didn't die, she would never be at ease. She could only urge Hua Yuan to take action again and again. How could Hua Yuan not know what she was thinking? Hua Yuan's lips curled into a cold smile. There's no rush. It's almost there. Emperor concubine Xichang pressed. What do you mean by not in a hurry? How soon is it? As long as he lives, I will live in fear. If she could, she would love nothing more than for Hua Yuan to pinch the young man's chin and pour poison into him. That way all troubles would end once and for all and there would be no future troubles. Hua Yuan snorted and did not answer. Xichang's princess concubine saw his unhappy expression and immediately came to her senses. She regretted being too impulsive. I'm just worried. I'm not doubting you, she explained dryly, trying to salvage some of the situation so that Hua Yuan wouldn't be in a bad mood and pour all his dirty tricks on her. There's no need to worry. Hua Yuan's expression softened slightly as he said, the time is ripe. This answer put Xichang's princess concubine's worried heart back to its original place. She and Hua Yuan had the same interests. At present, they were two grasshoppers tied to the same rope. If anything happened to her, Hua Yuan would not be able to escape. Reality proved that her worries were unfounded. Hua Yuan, that maniac, would definitely be able to scheme against anyone. The young man was still too young. In terms of skill and scheming, how could he compare to the scheming and maniac Hua Yuan? Xichang's princess concubine thought that Hua Yuan had not taken action, but that was not the case. Hua Yuan had taken action. However, he did not harm the young man's body but his mind. He suppressed his will and destroyed his psychological defenses, forcing the young man to lose all will to live in his panic. Finally, he consumed the poison that Hua Yuan had gotten someone to deliver to the young man. On this day the night was dark. The moon was hidden behind the dark clouds and the stars were dim. Hua Yuan stood under the window in a daze with his clothes draped over his shoulders. He was not in the mood to sleep. There was a letter on the table beside him. This letter had been delivered by the young man's attendant several hours ago. Because it was not personally delivered to Hua Yuan only saw it after he was done with all his work. The contents of the letter were not very useful. It was just the last cry of a desperate and dying young beast. When all was silent, a flurry of hurried footsteps could be heard from afar. When the other person ran closer, Hua Yuan could still hear the other person's heavy breathing. He looked at the approaching person with an indifferent expression, his brows slightly furrowed. Hua Yuan asked unhappily, "What's the matter?" The servants in the residence were all well-mannered. They served Hua Yuan carefully and would not run loudly under normal circumstances. However, at this moment they did not care about the rules. One could imagine how sensational the news brought by the servant was. Master, something bad has happened." The servant caught his breath and said breathlessly, "The young master is dead." Dead? Yes, the news just came. The young master committed suicide by ingesting poison. He's already gone. The servant trembled as he finished speaking. His eyes stared unblinkingly at Hua Yuan. His muscles tensed as he moved forward to catch the grieving Hua Yuan. Unexpectedly, Hua Yuan's reaction was beyond the servant's expectations. He thought that based on the deep relationship between Hua Yuan and the young master, even if he did not faint from grief, he would be horrified upon hearing this. However, Hua Yuan's expression did not change at all. It was as if the one who died was not his student, but an insignificant child beggar. He did not even ask how he died. It was as if Hua Yuan had already expected this and had been waiting for this news to come. The servant was frightened by his own guess. He hurriedly lowered his head, afraid that Hua Yuan would see an expression that he should not have. I already know. You may leave and prepare the clothes. The young man's death was no different from an earthquake to others, but it was within Hua Yuan's expectations. His indifferent gaze turned to the letter on the table, and the corners of his lips curled up in silent mockery. Stupid. This was Hua Yuan's evaluation of the young man's death. If he was not stupid and weak, how could the young man not know who the real person was? Before he died, he even wrote to him. His words were sincere and every sentence was filled with remorse. He said that he had let down Hua Yuan's many years of teaching. Now that he was gone, he asked him not to grieve for an incompetent and unfilial student. The victim's suicide note to the murderer was so sincere. It was really ridiculous. He's destined not to live. It's clean now that he's gone. Hua Yuan felt a little regretful. The young man was taught by Hua Yuan, but his ambition was not big enough. Chapter 1667. Without Princess Xichang, Shui would not kill the youth immediately out of consideration for the greater good. Because Shui needed a stable heir. If the youth lay low, he might have a chance to make a comeback in the future. Unfortunately, he was still too young. Faced with such mental pressure, the only way he could think of was to commit suicide. When Hua Yuan arrived, the youth's corpse had already been put away. He had changed into clean clothes and had light makeup on his face. Now that his eyes were closed, he did not look like he was dead, but more like he had fallen asleep. When the sun rose, he would open his pure and lively eyes, and Shui's officials who were guarding the rear crawled out of bed when they heard the news. Who killed young master? A hot-tempered old official dressed in plain clothes with a white belt around his waist rushed over with a murderous aura. The moment he arrived, he stared fiercely at Princess Xichang. Could it be you, vixen? The old official had heard of the scandal a while ago, but he would not abandon the young master he had watched grow up for a fallen country's concubine. Even if it was a scandal, it was the woman's fault. Abandoning Princess Xichang to protect the young master was a matter of course in his eyes. These days he had been thinking about how to save the youth's life, trying to find fault with Princess Xichang and push all the blame onto her. If that did not work, he could only take the risk and send a suicide squad to kill Princess Xichang. Unexpectedly, before he could do anything, the young master had already committed suicide by poisoning himself. Looking at the youth lying on the bed and seeing that his chest was no longer heaving, he immediately felt sorrow. Princess Xichang saw the old official draw his sword and was about to kill her. She was so frightened that her face paled and she screamed. Hua Yuan grabbed the old official's wrist and used a little force to make him release the sword hilt in pain. He said angrily, "Have you had enough?" The old official said relentlessly, "This vixen must die today." For some reason, ever since he had stepped into the house where the youth had committed suicide, Hua Yuan had felt a tightness in his chest. He did not know where this feeling came from, but it had pushed his rationality to the brink of collapse. He was easily angered and irritable. The old official had drawn his sword and caused trouble at this time, directly infuriating Hua Yuan. He pushed the old official away and almost lost his footing. It was as if his brain had lost blood, causing his vision to flicker. Scram! Hua Yuan angrily rebuked the old official. The old official said, "Young master was plotted against by that B***tch and forced to his death. Even if I have to risk my life, I will eliminate her." Xichang's Empress concubine screamed as she hid behind her maidservant. When she heard the old official's scolding, she could not help but agree. The old man's words were absolutely right. Wasn't Hua Yuan the B***tch she was referring to? The room was in chaos and people rushed over to stop the two of them. Some stopped the old official and some stopped Hua Yuan. Regardless of whether the young man's death was honorable or not, the deceased was more important. His body had just cooled down so they could not make a ruckus here and disturb the deceased. Moreover, it was really inappropriate for the two of them to fight in front of the corpse. "I told you to scram." Hua Yuan raised his hand and waved his sleeve, brushing away the people who tried to stop him. Before he could take half a step forward, he felt a sharp pain in the depths of his mind. The scenery in front of him blurred and turned scarlet. In Hua Yuan's eyes, the figures around him were all people made of blood without facial features. Their mouths opened and closed as they said something. One voice became two, two became four, four became eight. Gradually, the voices from all directions became thousands, interfering with his hearing. Hua Yuan's feet felt weak as he stumbled and fell forward. Fortunately, someone was quick enough to pull him up or he would have crashed to the ground. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events. Even the old official who wanted to take Xichang's Empress concubine's life was distracted. When they came over, they saw that Hua Yuan's face was abnormally pale. They thought that he was suppressing his grief, but they did not expect him to release his emotions. Everyone thought of the teacher-student relationship between Hua Yuan and the young man and felt very sad. They did not expect Hua Yuan to have such crazy looks. Stop arguing. All of you stop arguing. All of you scram. Scram. Hua Yuan pushed away the people who approached him and shouted at the top of his lungs. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked deranged. Young master has passed away. My condolences, military advisor. The dead cannot be remembered. Scram. All of you scram. Hua Yuan held his head in pain with one hand and pointed at the crowd with the other, telling them to stop talking. His head was really about to explode. His head hurt like there was a hand stirring his brain and crushing his skull. He was in so much pain that he was on the verge of death. After an unknown amount of time, Hua Yuan finally regained some of his senses. He knelt on the ground. His usual elegant demeanor was completely gone. All that was left was a strange madness and a dejection that came from his soul. Everyone thought that he had lost his composure because he could not take the blow. They did not expect Hua Yuan's next move to almost make their eyes pop out of their sockets. With a swoosh, he unsheathed his sword. Someone was so frightened that he shouted, "Military advisor, you mustn't." It turned out that Hua Yuan had taken advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention to pull out the sword from his opponent's waist and pretended to commit suicide. Judging from his expression and posture, he was clearly ready to die. In the nick of time, someone stepped forward to snatch his sword, but he was still a step too late. A long but not deep wound appeared on his neck. Seeing this, the others took the opportunity to rush forward and stop Hua Yuan, afraid that he would continue to seek death when he recovered. If Hua Yuan died, and Shui at the front lines would explode on the spot. Why are you stopping me? Hua Yuan roared these words. His cheeks were covered in tears. Someone said, "The young master has passed away. My condolences, military advisor." How could the Lord's trusted aide commit suicide to follow the young master after he passed away? Not to mention that the young master had not died honorably. He had committed suicide to escape punishment after defiling his stepmother. I am responsible for the young master's death. I deserve to die. Don't stop me. How could anyone take his words seriously? Instead, they thought that Hua Yuan was a loyal person. They did not dare to let go and let him seek death. Hua Yuan wanted to break down even more now. He was the one who had caused the death of his student. No, to be more precise, he had personally destroyed his student after he had lost his mind. He was the one who deserved to die. Hua Yuan did not expect that he had lost his mind to be this serious. The last person to appear had killed the other people, in a deranged manner. If not for the fact that Hua Yuan's true body was special and could not be erased or replaced, he would probably have died. He had been in a daze previously. Today he finally appeared, but he did not expect his student to die. Hua Yuan knew that he had committed a grave sin. He could only confess to his student after he died. He did not expect that no one would believe him even after he spoke the truth. These brainless idiots even stopped him from committing suicide. Was he committing suicide? He was doing justice on behalf of the heavens. As long as he died and this body died, that dangerous person would not appear again. Let go of me. No? Military advisor, you must calm down. Military advisor, we are also very sad that the young master has died. But you still have to help the Lord achieve hegemony. You cannot commit suicide. Xichang's Empress concubine, she suddenly felt that it was not unreasonable for Hua Yuan to be so arrogant. Look, in order to clear himself of suspicion, this person really used all his strength. The wound on his neck was still bleeding. If the crowd had not stopped him just now, Hua Yuan would have probably slit his throat when he recommended himself. Xichang's Empress concubine watched the show in a daze. Chapter 1668. Opportunities were fleeting. They could not be missed. Hua Yuan's main body took advantage of his student's death to temporarily regain consciousness. He had wanted to commit suicide and end all his troubles, but he did not expect to be stopped by the crowd. How could he fight against so many people alone? After a series of struggles, his sword was taken away, and his mouth was gagged when he tried to bite his tongue. All his energy was in vain and he ended up in a sorry state. He was filled with grief and indignation. He finally understood what it meant to be begging for death but unable to live. Hua Yuan only wanted to die. Why did everyone act as if he wanted their lives? Why were they fighting so hard? After a stalemate, Hua Yuan was exhausted. His arms and legs were weak and powerless, and he could only gasp for air through his mouth. Seeing that he did not have the energy to court death, the others secretly sighed in relief. Even though they did not like Hua Yuan, and Shui would lose an arm if Hua Yuan died. Their interest would be tied to Shui's. To put it simply, protecting Hua Yuan was protecting their own interests. Naturally, they had to try their best to stop him. You guys are unreasonable. Hua Yuan's head was spinning. Waves of dizziness and nausea washed over him. This feeling was too familiar. Before he lost consciousness, Hua Yuan felt a pair of murky red eyes open in the darkness. The owner of this pair of eyes was looking at him coldly. There was no sadness, no joy, no shock, no anger, but Hua Yuan felt as if he was being stared at by the nine hells. No, perhaps it was not a hallucination. The owner of this pair of eyes could really drag people into hell when he went crazy. Hua Yuan's heart trembled. All the hair on his body stood up in protest. He knew that that person was about to wake up. The advisor has fainted. Someone shouted. Only then did the crowd realize that Hua Yuan's face was pale, and his eyes were closed as he leaned back. He looked more like a corpse than the one on the bed. The crowd pressed him down, called into Hua Yuan's ear, and sent for a doctor. After all this, they were all drenched in sweat. It was as if they had run several kilometers with a 100-kilogram sandbag on their backs. Heaven did not disappoint those who worked hard. Their efforts were still useful. Before the doctor arrived, Hua Yuan slowly woke up and opened his eyes. Someone said, "Military advisor, the current situation is critical, and we still need you to put in effort to plan. How can you abandon the Lord for the young master?" The old official who had wanted to kill Shichang's princess concubine had also calmed down. He said a few words and did not continue fighting. They sincerely persuaded Hua Yuan to give up on the idea of dying, but the person in question had a look that said, "Are you all pigs? I'm fine." Hua Yuan propped himself up on his weak legs and noticed that there was some sort of sticky liquid on his neck. He raised his hand to wipe it off and brought it before his eyes to take a look. It was actually bright red blood. He curled the corners of his lips mockingly and said indifferently, "The young master has just passed away. Prepare the funeral rites and send someone to inform the Lord. The cause of young master's death is not honorable. To the public we will say that he suddenly died of a serious illness." When everyone saw that Hua Yuan had regained his composure, they could not help but feel relieved. Even if Hua Yuan's expression was deathly still, it was still better than drawing his sword and seeking death at the slightest provocation. As long as he didn't want to kill himself and sacrifice himself for his master, everything was fine. Yes, your majesty. Just like that, the curtains fell on the farce. A doctor hurried over to treat the wound on Hua Yuan's neck. Hua Yuan did not move at all, allowing the doctor to do as he pleased. He was like a lifeless porcelain doll. When the doctor saw this, he thought that Hua Yuan had failed to sacrifice himself for his master and was disheartened. He sighed and said, "You must avoid eating for the next few days. Your wound must not come into contact with any filth to prevent bad luck from entering your body and causing your wound to swell and rot. I will prescribe some medicine for you. Take it regularly and you will get better." Hua Yuan asked him, "Is the wound deep?" The doctor replied, "It's not deep, but the location is dangerous." Hua Yuan remained silent when he heard that. However, the emotions that flashed in his eyes made the doctor's heart palpitate. "You may leave. I want to be alone and rest. I still have to arrange the young master's funeral rites later." Hua Yuan chased him away. The doctor's lips quivered, but he did not say anything to dissuade him. He could only leave quietly. The moment the doctor left, Hua Yuan flicked his sleeves and knocked everything in sight to the ground. His elegant and handsome face was filled with malevolence. "I'm not a lunatic, I'm not. I am me." He suppressed his roar in his throat. Even though his voice was not loud, it was extremely penetrating and infectious, causing the hair of those who heard it to stand on end. Unfortunately, he was the only one in the room. No one else could hear him. The chaotic night was dispersed by the morning sun. The news of the young master's sudden death from an acute illness spread everywhere as if it had wings. This news naturally reached Shui, who was at the front lines. Shui received 2 letters. One was a normal funeral announcement, and the other was a secret letter that Hua Yuan had kept under wraps for a long time. This secret letter described in detail how the young master had bullied his pregnant concubine mother, causing her to have an unstable pregnancy and almost losing her child. Apart from that, Hua Yuan also added the truth of the young master's death. He had not died a sudden death. Instead, he had committed suicide out of fear after doing something wrong. The 2 letters arrived one after the other. When he read the first letter, Shui felt grief and indescribable joy at the same time. His adopted son had died, and the stumbling block that had been weighing on his heart was gone. No one could stop his biological son from ascending to the throne. When he read the second secret letter, Shui's anger shot through the roof. The veins on his forehead swelled up and down, as if there were green snakes coiling around his forehead. He was so angry that his hands were shaking, his face was ashen, and his chest rose and fell rapidly. He wanted nothing more than to dig out his stepson and whip his corpse. He had bullied and humiliated his concubine mother while he was away, causing her to have an unstable pregnancy and almost have a miscarriage. Shui did not know that he had actually raised an ingrate who could not be tamed. He had actually done such a shameless, treacherous thing. Well done. These 3 words were almost squeezed out through his molars. When he thought about how his woman, a woman who was pregnant with his child, had been tainted by his stepson, an intense feeling of humiliation surged into his heart, causing his hatred to shoot to the heavens. Committing suicide out of fear of punishment? That was too easy for this brat. At the very least, he should be executed by 1,000 cuts. Despite his anger, Shui could not spread the word about what his stepson had done. Similarly, he could not reveal the truth of his death to the public. Not only could he not, but he also had to clean up the other party's mess and ensure his reputation after his death. If he did not do this, the outside world would inevitably speculate that his stepson's death had been incited by Shui, that he had harmed his stepson in order to clear the way for his biological son. This would inevitably leave behind a negative impression that Shui was vicious and merciless, that he would do anything to achieve his goals. More importantly, the world would also know that Shui had been cuckolded by his stepson. For a man, being cuckolded was the most unbearable humiliation. For the sake of his own reputation, Shui could not act on impulse. At most, he would use some small methods to vent his anger behind the scenes. Chapter 1669. After all, he was someone who had climbed to the position of a feudal lord. Shui had his flaws, but he also had his merits. He couldn't be killed with a single blow. Not to mention what the unfilial son had done that violated human ethics. The impact his death had on Shui was not something that could be summed up by being cuckolded. With his death, Shui had no heir. His only bloodline was still germinating in the belly of the Xichang princess. The officials didn't know whether the child was a boy or a girl, or how talented he was. Everything was unknown. They couldn't help but feel anxious. Shui had an heir. This was the only advantage he had over Jiang Pingji. Now that the heir was dead and Shui was much older than Jiang Pingji, his remaining advantage was gone. Thinking of this, Shui felt pain and sorrow. He couldn't help but pull out the corpse of the Nanman tribe that he had exterminated. If the Nanman hadn't rebelled and overthrown Nanxing, he, Shui, was a man with both a son and a daughter. How could he have fallen to such a miserable state? When he thought of the scene of his children losing their lives in the Nanman tribe, he was so grief-stricken that he couldn't speak. Hatred grew wildly in his heart like weeds. Perhaps his luck had been too bad recently. Bad things happened to Shui one after another. First, 200,000 dawn of rations were plundered by Jiang Pingji. Then, his stepson bullied his stepmother and committed suicide to escape punishment. Following that, Hua Yuan almost killed himself for his master. This wasn't the end. Their enemies also increased their attacks in tacit understanding, causing Shui to be badly battered. The rations issue hadn't been completely resolved. The news of the rations shortage spread like wildfire. The morale of the soldiers at the grassroots level was greatly shaken. Shui was still a scumbag. He looked for Lu Zheng when he needed something. Little did he know that Lu Zheng only wanted to curse. Did he really think he was a fairy? Could he conjure rations out of thin air? If he could, he would be the first to conjure rations to drown Shui. Lu Zheng's anger burned fiercely, but anger couldn't change anything. The crisis before him was getting more and more intense. Therefore, Lu Zheng could only give Shui an ultimatum. He wanted Shui to urge Hua Yuan to replenish the rations as soon as possible. If he couldn't, everyone would starve to death together. How infuriating. Even a cup of cold water couldn't extinguish Lu Zheng's anger. Too many things had taken up Lu Zheng's energy recently, so he forgot that his schoolmate was a troublemaker. Jiang Pingji and Lu Zheng were both students from Langyi Academy. They were alumni of the same school, so they were naturally in the same camp. With a little effort, Jiang Pingji could make the relationship between Shui and Lu Zheng, which was on the verge of collapse, take a turn for the worse, or even completely collapse. From what she had seen, Shui was not a broad-minded person. His position and opinions were different from Lu Zheng's, and the two of them often had conflicts. This could be seen from the fact that Shui had placed Hua Yuan in an important position over the past 2 years, while Lu Zheng had been given the cold shoulder. Shui had a lot of opinions about Lu Zheng. If Jiang Pingji added fuel to the fire and sowed discord between the two, she might even be able to use Shui to force Lu Zheng into a desperate situation. Lu Zheng was not someone who would sit and wait for death. If that really happened, he might even jump ship at the last minute. Hence, when Wei Xi saw his lord bending over the table and writing a letter to his classmate, Lu Zheng, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. Because Jiang Pingji did not hide her letter from Wei Xi could see the lingering sentences in the letter. Almost every word recalled the time when he was studying at Langyi Academy. Jiang Pingji used simple but intimate words to exaggerate the friendship between them into 100%. Those who did not know the truth would wonder if Lu Zheng and Jiang Pingji had such a close relationship when they were young. Wei Xi recalled Shui's temperament and felt more and more sorry for Lu Zheng. How many lifetimes of bad luck did this man have to have a lord like Shui and an opponent like Jiang Pingji? Before he sympathized with Shui, Wei Xi also had to sympathize with himself in his previous life. He and Lu Zheng were in the same boat. Based on Xiaoyin's temperament, it's impossible for him to accept my lord's invitation. Wei Xi could not help but remind him. Lu Zheng was a petty and vengeful fellow. She had offended him greatly, so it would not be easy to recruit him in the future. Shui's temperament is very different from Lu Zheng's. The two of them are not on the same path. Even if my lord did not interfere, sooner or later, there would be discord between them. Why did my lord go through all this trouble? Not all lords in this world are as broad-minded and perceptive as I am, Jiang Pingji said narcissistically. Shui has never been a gentleman. He doesn't walk the same path as Xiaoyin. I wanted to use Shui to force Xiaoyin into a corner and force him to leave Shui sooner. Time has dragged on for too long. I don't have the time to waste with Shui, this clown. Coincidentally, there was a problem on Shui's side. It was the perfect time to make them fall apart in one go. Don't you think that Xiaoyin is too much of an eyesore? Wei Xi was speechless. If Lu Zheng heard Jiang Pingji's words, he would definitely cry, wouldn't he? Jiang Pingji continued, you and I both know Xiaoyin's ability. Letting him stay by Shui's side won't do us any good. Wei Xi coughed softly and said, although it's the truth, my lord's way of expressing it is still unacceptable. To be honest, Wei Xi had been rather jealous of Lu Zheng for a period of time. Lu Zheng could approach her without any ill feelings and talk to her freely, but Wei Xi could only stand outside the safety line and watch. He could only experience all kinds of bitterness on his own. No one could confide in him. Jiang Pingji didn't know what Wei Xi was thinking about. She only smiled and said, there's only Zi Xiao by my side. Xiaoyin isn't here. Can you still repeat what he said? Even if he knows what I said, he can't have any opinions. In the future, I will be his master and he will be my subject. Wei Xi said, this is a good ending. In the previous life, Lu Zheng's ending was too tragic. If this life was perfect, it could make up for the regrets of the previous life. If Lu Zheng knew about the conversation between the adulterous couple, he would most likely be so angry that he would jump up in rage. Was there anyone more shameless than them in this world? As it turned out, there wasn't. Jiang Pingji was a textbook scoundrel. No one could compare to her. When Lu Zheng saw the letter that Jiang Pingji had written for him appear in Shui's hands, there was only one thought in his mind. That bastard was up to mischief again. It wasn't that Jiang Pingji hadn't written letters to Lu Zheng before. Not only did she write them herself, but she also sent Fang Ji to persuade him. Unfortunately, Lu Zheng's beliefs were firm and unwavering. This time Jiang Pingji gave him a strong dose of medicine. The contents of the letter were as ambiguous as one could imagine. More importantly, this letter appeared when Shui had just suffered a defeat. Shui's expression was as solemn as ink. Does Xiaoyin have any explanation? Faced with Shui's questioning, Lu Zheng was furious. It's just a clumsy method of sowing discord. It's not like it hasn't happened in the past. Is my lord going to doubt my loyalty based on this alone? Lu Zheng couldn't be bothered to defend himself. Every time Shui doubted him, his good impression of Shui wore away. Chapter 1670. In the face of Shui's calm questioning, Lu Zheng's reaction seemed to have a deeper meaning. Why didn't he confess to Shui that Fang Zhi had come to lobby him? Did Shui really not know? When Fang Zhi had come, Lu Zheng had still been thrown to the side by Shui. Was he crazy or stupid? Why did he confess? Lu Zheng looked at his lord calmly. He had put in years of effort and energy for this man, trying his best to maintain this relationship between the lord and his subject. In the end, all he got in return was vigilance, suspicion, and suppression. Lu Zheng was already in this state. How could he prove his loyalty? Did he really have to imitate his predecessors and stab a dagger into his heart, dig it out, and let Shui take a look? Ha, ridiculous. Shui attracted most of the attention. The real culprit, Jiang Pingji, was not so annoying. Fang Zhi was my classmate and friend when I was young. He had a personal relationship with Lu Shi. He didn't serve Lu Shi. At most, it was a personal relationship. I didn't say anything about Fang Zhi because I didn't want my lord to misunderstand and hurt Fang Zhi. Up to this point, Lu Zheng was still calm and composed. He wasn't embarrassed or flustered at all after being exposed. He was even calm and composed enough to speak frankly with assurance and composure in front of Shui. He enunciated each and every word to excuse himself. Moreover, I've never intentionally concealed the matter regarding Fang Zhi. My lord doesn't trust me, but can you not trust Hua Yuan? He knows about Fang Zhi, but he didn't tell you. Why doesn't my lord think about it? Lu Zheng couldn't help but mock himself when he said this. He and Hua Yuan didn't get along, but now he had to use him as a shield to dispel Shui's suspicions. It was really ridiculous. He knows that Fang Zhi came to you? Shui frowned slightly. He hadn't expected Hua Yuan to be involved. Lu Zheng nodded. Yes. When Hua Yuan went to the manor, Fang Zhi was still there, but he didn't say anything. Hua Yuan was a good shield. Indeed, most of Shui's suspicions were dispelled. His original thoughts began to waver. Shui's expression softened, but Lu Zheng couldn't help but close his eyes. He didn't want to see Shui's reaction. He didn't want Shui to see his disappointment. Shui muttered to himself, why didn't he tell me? Perhaps he thinks that Fang Zhi is harmless, or perhaps he thinks that my loyalty to you is unquestionable, or perhaps he thinks that this is something that can be used against me in the future. As Lu Zheng spoke, the mockery on his face intensified. Which one does my lord think it is? Lu Zheng's question was rather blunt, and he even seemed to be reprimanding Shui to his face. Hearing this, Shui was secretly dissatisfied. Xiaoyin, are you blaming me? Shui asked despite knowing the answer. Hearing this, Lu Zheng sneered inwardly. Complain? He, Lu Zheng, had suffered so many grievances, but in Shui's eyes they were merely complaints? He now regretted his blindness back then. Even Jiang Pingji, that unreliable and fickle woman, was more reliable than Shui. Shui was truly a fighter among scumbags. He took it for granted that he would be able to enjoy the blessings of having two wives. With his left arm around Hua Yuan and his right arm around Lu Zheng, the two strategists would hold hands and become good brothers. For his great cause, they would do their utmost until the day they die. All personal conflicts must be put aside, and he could not neglect the public for personal reasons. He said, from what you said just now, you seem to have a deep misunderstanding of Hua Qin. Both you and he are upright people who uphold justice. Why would he use underhanded tricks to frame a colleague? I heard that the two of you were at odds in private, but I didn't expect you to be like water and fire. Xiaoyin, both you and he are my right-hand men. You are like my lips and teeth. Although there are conflicts between our lips and teeth, we depend on each other and support each other. Lu Zheng was speechless. Could Shui stop talking when he didn't know how to speak? He was about to vomit from Shui's analogy. Damn it, Hua Yuan and I are like lips and teeth. Forget it. With Shui, the peerless scumbag, serving as a foil, Jiang Pingji, the scumbag, could even claim to be his favorite, the White Moonlight. Lu Zheng said, my lord, do you really not know about the conflict between me and Hua Yuan? Shui furrowed his brows and said, I've heard about it occasionally, but I don't think Xiaoyin is the kind of person who would delay public affairs because of a personal grudge. Lu Zheng's previous personal image was too bright and lofty. Not only Shui but everyone else took it for granted that Lu Zheng would sacrifice his personal grudge for public affairs. They had completely forgotten that Lu Zheng was human, not a saint. He also had emotions and desires. He couldn't be selfless. After Lu Zheng heard this, he felt especially tired. Even though Shui had met with misfortune in his middle age, the habits he had developed in his early years had long been deeply ingrained in his bones. After his recovery, he had forgotten what it felt like to be a human being in fear and trepidation. He had regained the confidence of a high and mighty aristocratic family. He had completely forgotten what scruples were, and he wouldn't empathize with Lu Zheng's difficulties. And Shui's question just now was very inappropriate. He was blatantly accusing Lu Zheng of abandoning public affairs for personal reasons and purposely making life difficult for Hua Yuan. Lu Zheng concealed the disappointment in his heart. He bowed and cupped his hands. His tone was calm as he said, "Lu, she used such a despicable method to frame me and incite discord in my lord's trust in me, but I can't produce strong evidence to prove my innocence. This is my fault. Regarding Fang Zhi's matter, it was indeed my lack of consideration. In order to avoid arousing suspicion, I'm willing to ground myself and hand over my military power. I'll decide what to do after the truth comes to light and I'm proven innocent." And Shui was dumbfounded when he heard this. He did want to denounce Lu Zheng for his crimes, but after saying it out loud, the balance in his heart leaned towards Lu Zheng. He regretted being overly suspicious. However, Lu Zheng had made things very clear and didn't give him a way out. No matter what Shui thought, Lu Zheng couldn't be bothered to figure it out. He ground himself and didn't care about anything else. On the other side, Jiang Pingji was still persistently writing letters to her old classmate. She would write a letter when there was a war, when there was no war, when she was in a good mood, when she was in a bad mood. Wei Ci wiped off his cold sweat and watched as his lord stretched her legs on the brink of having her legs broken by Lu Zheng. Isn't my lord afraid that doing this will dispel Shui's suspicions? Shui was Wei Ci's former lord. He knew him very well. Once he made up his mind, his lofty heroism was very bewitching. Back then, Wei Ci was willing to leave his mountain and follow Shui not only because he was moved by his sincerity, but also because of his trust in him. In his lord's words, Shui was the head of multi-level marketing. He was very good at selling promotions. If Shui let down his guard and trusted Lu Zheng again, Lu Zheng might have a change of heart. After all, he was the man he had chosen. He had to assist him even if he had to kneel down to make the impossible possible. Even if the other party was a pile of **T, there would always be strategists who wanted to carve him into a flower. Unfortunately, Lu Zheng was such a person. Chapter 1671. Other than Shui, no one knew what had happened between him and Lu Zheng. They only knew that Lu Zheng had been sick since that day, and Kang Xintong was in charge of serving tea. Outsiders thought it was just an excuse, and Shui also thought that Lu Zheng was pretending to be sick. Who knew that Lu Zheng was really sick, very seriously? Kang Xintong watched as Lu Zheng lost weight at a visible speed. She was so anxious that she cried, but there was nothing she could do. "Godfather, the doctor said that this is a mental illness. Ordinary medicine can't cure it." The depression in his heart was difficult to dispel. To put it bluntly, Lu Zheng had fallen ill from worry. Lu Zheng lay motionless on the bed. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but his body was weak and his mind was muddled. As his illness worsened, he often couldn't remember things. He didn't even remember what he had said a second ago. In the eyes of outsiders, his sickly appearance was quite strong. His eyes were sunken, his lips were chapped, and his bright eyes were like the eyes of a dead fish. There was no trace of his former elegance. Shui came to visit twice. Each time he only stayed for a short while before leaving with a sigh. A few days ago he even asked about Lu Zheng's illness. When he heard the doctor say that it was caused by a mental illness, Shui realized something and stopped asking. Why should he continue asking? Shui was a proud person. He knew that Lu Zheng's illness was caused by his dissatisfaction with him, so why would he seek trouble? Lu Zheng drank medicine for a few days and his illness was under control. He stayed awake longer and longer, but his spirit was still weak. Kang Xintong took care of him seriously and didn't ask him to do anything big or small. This filial piety was rare. Lu Zheng said, "I was just angry and couldn't get over it. When I get over it, my illness will naturally get better." Kang Xintong asked, "Outsiders say that Godfather is wise and resourceful. What else in this world can make you feel bad?" Lu Zheng said, "How can I take the flattery of outsiders seriously? There are many things that I can't get over." For example? Lu Zheng raised his hand to push up the band that had slid down from his forehead. He sighed and said, "For example, you spent a lot of money to buy a raw stone and treated it like a treasure. You carried it with you every day and spent years carving and polishing it. On the day you succeeded, you thought it would be the most dazzling jewel in the world, but someone told you that there were as many latrines as you wanted. Kang Xintong shivered. She felt that her foster father was scolding her. Lu Zheng said faintly, "No matter who it is, they will most likely take things too hard when they encounter such a thing." Kang Xintong wanted to say something but hesitated. She was hesitating between selling it or not. Your daughter feels that, since it's a stone from the latrine pit, it's filthy and dirty. Why not throw it away as soon as possible, lest it's an eyesore? Lu Zheng said, "I can't afford to lose this face." Kang Xintong, so foster father was suffering because he wanted to save face? Lu Zheng said, "Lu Shi to Zixiao, Huang Song to Yumo, Su Bei to Wenbin and Shui to your father." Kang Xintong asked in an untimely manner. Lu Shi, Huang Song and Su Bei. I know who they are, but Zixiao, Yumo and Wenbin are, for example, and Shui and his adoptive father. Could it be that both of them had the relationship of ruler and subject? Lu Zheng said, "My fellow apprentices, the four of us are all disciples of Master Yuanjing. We will never forget Master Yuanjing's kindness in knowing and educating us. However, Master Yuanjing is such a good teacher, but in the end he taught 3 blind students. I'm ashamed to face Master Yuanjing. 3 of his 4 disciples died in battle. This was the biggest stain on Master Yuanjing's teaching career." Kang Xintong counted with her fingers. The numbers were not right. Why are there 3? Lu Zheng almost choked. Was this the main point? He endured his internal injuries and said, "Wei Zixiao doesn't count. He had perfectly inherited Master Yuanjing's good point of having a good eye. Why else would people say that Wei Ci was cunning?" Lu Zheng could not figure out why Wei Ci chose Jiang Pingji. In the academy, the relationship between the two was quite cold. According to the news that Fang Ji brought, Jiang Pingji successfully had an affair with Wei Ci and ruined the most beautiful flower in Langyi Academy. What a beast. Kang Xintong responded obediently, but the corners of her lips could not help but reveal a smile. Lu Zheng almost suffered an internal injury from holding back. He had forgotten that the little girl in front of him was Jiang Pingji's poison. She looked obedient on the surface, but who knew if she was crazy for her beloved disciple and banging her head against the wall for her beloved disciple? It's fine if she embarrassed herself in front of others, but it had to be that mischievous bastard Lu Shi, Lu Zheng said gloomily. Look at what she did. Being a lord is really idle. She writes letters to sow discord all day long. How can she not know what kind of person En Shui is? Every letter is written just right. She says it's for me, but in fact, it's for En Shui to read. If Lu Zheng was not smart enough to retreat in order to advance, he might have been tortured to death by En Shui in secret. Jiang Pingji hated betrayal the most. Was En Shui generous to betrayers? Kang Xintong said, "Then, what do we do now?" Lu Zheng said, "Let's take it one step at a time. En Shui's rear is going to be in great trouble. I'm afraid they will collapse." Kang Xintong was shocked. "I'm slow-witted. I can't see where the trouble is." Lu Zheng reminded her of the key words. Rations. Rations. Kang Xintong repeated in a murmur. The general who was killed by En Shui out of anger was innocent. There was a problem with the rations before they were plundered. The person in charge of the rations was Hua Yuan. Looking at the overall situation, he was the only one who had the motive and ability to tamper with the rations. At this critical moment, En Shui's only adopted son died suddenly. It's hard not to suspect a conspiracy. En Shui refuses to listen to advice. He will die without a complete corpse. At this point, Lu Zheng did not address En Shui as lord in front of his adopted daughter. Instead, he called him by his name. Kang Xintong said, "Hua Yuan? What's in it for him to do this?" Lu Zheng said, "How would I know what a lunatic is thinking? Then, aren't we in great danger?" Kang Xintong did not like En Shui, but if En Shui was toppled, the father-daughter duo would be in a difficult situation. Lu Zheng snorted. "Lu Shi owes me a debt. Does she dare to burn the bridge after crossing it?" "A debt?" Lu Zheng said, "You'll know when the time comes." Kang Xintong did not ask further after hearing this. The root of Lu Zheng's illness was in his heart. If he refused to get over it, it would be difficult for ordinary medicine to work. Because En Shui had courted death, Lu Zheng had given up. The latter watched coldly as he recuperated from his illness. As the battle escalated, En Shui retreated step by step. The rations predicament became more and more severe. Hua Yuan, who was at the rear, was slow. In addition, Jiang Pingji had sent people to interfere with the rations several times. En Shui was attacked from all sides. "Why is it so noisy outside?" Lu Zheng closed the bamboo scroll and looked up to ask. Kang Xintong said, "The rations have arrived. They've solved our urgent problem." Lu Zheng frowned. His eyes revealed his deep thoughts. "Godfather, we're having meat porridge for lunch today." Kang Xintong came in with 2 bowls of fragrant meat porridge. She picked up some pickled vegetables as a side dish. "The meat tastes a little sour." Lu Zheng picked up the meat porridge and took a bite. He seemed to have bitten into something. His expression changed drastically and he vomited. Chapter 1672. Kang Xintong was so frightened by this turn of events that she hurriedly put down the wooden bowl in her hands. With a clatter, some of the broth in the bowl spilled out as she moved, splashing onto the table. She couldn't care less about this and hurriedly went forward to support Lu Zheng, who was pretending to vomit. Kang Xintong was already frightened out of her wits by this turn of events. She thought Lu Zheng had been poisoned. Godfather, has someone poisoned the porridge? Kang Xintong thought of the broken relationship between her godfather and her lord, and Chui, and the irreconcilable conflict. Her first reaction was to suspect Chui of poisoning people. Anger burned in her heart. Lu Zheng was still bending over and vomiting. Tears flowed out of the corners of his eyes. The corners of his eyes were dyed red, making him look more fragile. Kang Xintong could only pat his back to soothe his breathing. When he was about to vomit bile, Kang Xintong got up and brought him some water to rinse his mouth. Lu Zheng vomited heavily. His expression turned from green to bloodless white. "It's not poison." Lu Zheng suppressed the nausea that rose up in his throat from time to time and took the water Kang Xintong handed him to rinse his mouth. Only then did he feel better. Kang Xintong's eyes were filled with surprise and fear. She asked timidly, "It's not poison. Could it be that the meat has rotted?" Lu Zheng pursed his lips and didn't speak. But from his expression and gaze, this bowl of porridge wasn't as childish as rotting. Could it be? Kang Xintong had been raised by Lu Zheng's side for a few months. Her horizons and knowledge had improved by leaps and bounds. Lu Zheng's various reactions gave Kang Xintong a very bad feeling. She looked down at the things Lu Zheng had vomited and scanned them with her eyes. Kang Xintong suddenly saw something. Her gaze almost froze. Before she could scream, Lu Zheng's warm and broad palm covered her eyes. "Stop looking. Have someone come in and tidy up the things." Lu Zheng's voice was slightly hoarse as if he was suppressing something. Kang Xintong felt more at ease when she heard him. She took a few deep breaths and suppressed the sour taste that seemed to be rising up in her throat. She ran out without looking back. Lv Zheng distinctly heard the sound of Kang Xintong vomiting outside the tent and a sense of disappointment and mockery surfaced in his heart. He picked up a pair of chopsticks and fiddled with the vomit. A flat armor-like object rolled out with a small piece of bone attached to it. This was the foreign object that Lu Zheng had just bitten. If he was not mistaken, this was clearly someone's little finger bone, and the fingernail was still on it. Lu Zheng stared at it for a long time. Although he did not vomit, his face turned pale. Lu Zheng was lost in thought as he sat on the bed. No one knew what he was thinking. He did not even hear the sound of Kang Xintong lifting the curtain and coming in. When he came back to his senses, he hurriedly hid the item. Unfortunately, he was a step too slow and Kang Xintong still saw it. "Godfather, the meat porridge that I mistakenly ate just now was actually mixed with human flesh, right?" Kang Xintong asked with a trembling voice. Her watery eyes were filled with panic and fear. "There are many dead in the war between the 2 armies. And Chui is short of rations and the supply lines are often obstructed. They are already at the point of running out of ammunition and rations. Hua Yuan is also secretly obstructing them from the rear. The people who are collecting rations mixed human flesh into the porridge and made it into minced meat. It doesn't seem unexpected. Xintong, did you see it?" Seeing that she had seen it, Lu Zheng did not continue to hide it. Instead, he straightened his body and a bitter smile appeared on his pale face. He pointed at the half-cooked little finger and said with a complicated expression, "In troubled times, we are at the chopping block, and those who are separated are meat on the chopping block. Be it in Chui or Lu Shi, in the end they are just people who are pushed by the world to struggle. The most pitiful are these people who can't even be buried in peace after their deaths. They have to be made into dried meat for the 3 armies to eat. We have to get rid of it." Kang Xintong's body trembled in fear. She thought that the scene she had experienced was the most tragic. That was until Lu Zheng brought her to a dark alley for a stroll, which refreshed her view of the world. She thought that was the cruelest side of troubled times. Only now did she realize that this not-so-bloody scene in front of her gave her an impact that the former couldn't compare to. Xintong, find someone to inquire about the source of this batch of rations. I want to see when this farce will end. Seeing that Kang Xintong was slowly calming down, Lu Zheng's expression softened a little. He instructed, remember, you must inquire carefully and don't alarm others. Kang Xintong nodded heavily. She went forward to clean up the 2 bowls of porridge and the vomit on the ground. Although the things were cleaned up, the memory that was deeply engraved in her mind was not so easy to forget. The more Kang Xintong didn't want to think about it, the more the little finger and the half-hanging nail swayed in front of her. It made her face pale and her spirit weak. After spending a lot of effort to inquire about the detailed information, Kang Xintong didn't delay and immediately informed Lu Zheng. She repeated clearly, Godfather, I've inquired about the news. According to the rumor, Hua Yuan sent someone to inform us that the new rations will arrive in 3 days, but the army's rations are almost depleted. And Shui had no choice but to send people to the nearby towns to plunder the surplus rations of the commoners. Lu Zheng sat on the bed with his clothes draped over his shoulders. He couldn't help but sneer. Ridiculous. Let's not talk about how many commoners there are in the nearby towns. Even if there were many commoners, the war last year affected the crops, and Lu Shi destroyed the spring plowing this year. The food stored in the commoners' homes isn't enough for them to last an entire year, much less the hundreds of thousands of soldiers under An Shui's command. Kang Xintong said, in the end we had to use extraordinary means to gather a batch of rations. If it's not enough, we have to make up for it with human breasts. Kang Xintong frowned when she said the word human breasts. She looked like she wanted to vomit. Compared to Kang Xintong's reaction, Lu Zheng was much calmer. It wasn't that he was more accepting than Kang Xintong, nor was it that he was cold-hearted. It was just that he had seen more things. Human breasts were not rare in history books. There were even records of people trading their children for food and cannibalism. More than 10 years ago, the 4 factions of Nanman had wreaked havoc on the commoners of Nanxing. Wherever they passed, not even a blade of grass would grow. Wherever they went to war, they would burn, kill, and pillage. Similarly, they would eat people wherever they went. The allied army of Nanxing had conquered Nanman and plundered countless spoils of war. At that time, the relationship between Lu Zheng and An Shui hadn't completely fallen apart. At most, there was some conflict. The latter knew that Lu Zheng liked books, so he organized all the books and spoils of war he plundered and threw them all to Lu Zheng. Later, Lu Zheng stayed at home and organized the books out of boredom. After sorting them into different categories, he unintentionally discovered a gourmet guide written by a scholar of a different tribe in Nanman. He named it Cannibal Rhapsody. It wasn't very literary, but every word he wrote made the reader's hair stand on end. Chapter 1673. A baby's flesh was brittle and could not be boiled for too long. Baby girls were the best. Children's flesh was tender and cooked to a certain extent. Ginger garlic rice wine removed the fishy smell. Boys were the best. Adults' flesh was sour but chewy. Men's lean flesh was especially outstanding. Women had more white flesh and were slightly greasy. They were suitable for human oil. The flesh of old men was unbearably stinky and sour. It was tasteless. Only human bones were boiled into soup with spices. The soup was rich and fragrant. Apart from these, the author had also tried unborn fetuses in women's wombs. There were fetuses every month. The entire Cannibal Rhapsody had less than 500 words, but each word was filled with the greatest malice and evil in the world. After reading the Cannibal Rhapsody, Lu Zheng's desire for peace grew stronger. He had staked everything on An Shui, hoping that such a tragedy would not happen again. In the end, An Shui disappointed him again and again. An Shui and An Duoshi could not bear Lu Zheng's ambition. Kang Xintong sobbed. Human breasts. How could they make them? Lu Zheng said calmly, that depends on the situation. Kang Xintong was shocked by the information revealed in Lu Zheng's words. Her red eyes widened. She called out hesitantly, her voice trembling, Foster father. If An Shui was a wise ruler, there would naturally be people who would stand up and take the blame for the matter of mixing human breast milk as army rations. Lu Zheng sighed. We are not the other tribes. They are unscrupulous and cannibalism is a common occurrence. But we are different. There are some things the other tribes can do and we can't. Using humans as food to fill one's stomach, even if it's an expedient measure, is an act that goes against human ethics. It's extremely cruel. Not only will it be criticized by the world, but it will also be reviled by future generations. Even so, it depends on whether it's worth it. Kang Xintong's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. Foster father, you mean? Lu Zheng said, If we're really at the end of the line and Chui is worthy of being reviled for generations, human breasts are also worth it. He didn't care about using human breasts as army rations, but that Chui wasn't worthy of others taking the blame for him. This was Lu Zheng's worldview. It wasn't just him, many strategists were the same. After Kang Xintong heard this, her body slightly trembled. It was unknown what kind of battle was going on in her heart. If you think it's cruel, wait until these matters are settled and you can stay in the inner courtyard until you are of age. I will find a good marriage for you. Lu Zheng's expression was calm as he said, Hua Yuan said that the provisions will arrive in 3 days, but this person's words cannot be trusted. He is not loyal to Chui and even has the ambition to murder and replace him. 3 days later, the rations would still be nowhere to be seen. Lu Shi has secured his victory in advance. Even though Lu Zheng thought it absurd, he had to admit that his classmate was more suitable than Chui to be the ruler of the world. It was time for this dispute to come to an end. Kang Xintong said, Will foster father turn to Duke Lanting in the future? That's right, she cares a lot about him. Value? It was hard to say. Lu Shi's personality was hard to predict. It would not be an exaggeration to say that she was moody and temperamental. She had tried to recruit him time and time again, but each time she had tried to sow discord and scheme. Who knew what her true intentions were? Was she really trying to recruit him or was she just putting on a show? Lu Zheng was a sensible person but he also thought too much. It was easy for him to get into a dead end. He continued, However, I'm not senior brother Cheng Yumo. If Chui really loses, he'll lay low for a while. He'll most likely make use of his relationship with Langi Academy to become an official again. Cheng Yumo? The senior brother that foster father mentioned before? Lu Zheng said, He is a gentleman. His temperament is different from mine and he is more thorough in his thinking. He is good in every way except for one thing. He is too selfless. Ever since Huang Song was defeated, there was no news of Yumo and he stayed at home. Of course he did not choose Huang Song. He considered many things mainly for his senior brothers and Master Yuanjing. He did not want to implicate them. Kang Xintong did not understand. How can it be implicated? Lu Jing said, If you carefully observe the officials under Lu Shi's tent, you will find out how powerful Langi Academy is. Duke Lanting may not care about this. It doesn't matter if there is one more or one less. Kang Xintong thought that her idol would not be so narrow-minded. She doesn't care but Yumo won't. The other people from Langi Academy won't either, Lu Zheng said helplessly. There are few gentlemen in the world but there are many petty people. Langi Academy is not a pure land. Master Yuanjing cannot guarantee that the students he teaches will be decent gentlemen. There will always be people who rely on their relationship with Langi Academy and do whatever it takes to climb up. This is not what the teacher and senior brothers want to see. But they can only restrain themselves and not others. The more Kang Xintong listened, the more she felt that something was wrong. If Lu Zheng thought that Cheng Jing, who avoided arousing suspicion, was a gentleman, did he not consider himself a villain? Cheng Jing chose to avoid arousing suspicion, but Lu Zheng said he wanted to become an official. Foster father? Lu Zheng said, Everyone's choice is different. There is nothing to criticize as long as you have a clear conscience. Kang Xintong also said, If so, I am also willing to follow you. I will never be a bird in the inner chamber. Lu Zheng's lips curled up into a faint smile. Good. Because of the human breast, Kang Xintong and Lu Zheng did not have the appetite to eat that day. They could not stop the soldiers from eating this batch of provisions. They could only guarantee that they would not eat it. Tomorrow I will find an excuse to take you out of the military camp. Chui was destined to kneel either in the hands of Jiang Pingji or Hua Yuan. Lu Zheng did not want to be buried with him. Besides, the provisions of the military camp could not last for 2 or 3 days. After the ammunition and provisions were exhausted, Chui might not be able to control the situation. Lu Zheng cherished his life. He did not want to die before he saw the world at peace. Kang Xintong nodded. She raised her hand and soaked the hard flatbread in the hot soup. Otherwise she could not bite it at all. Lu Zheng ate 2 bites and put it down. He let Kang Xintong eat the rest. Just as Lu Zheng had expected, the provisions promised by Hua Yuan did not arrive. Everyone raised their heads in anticipation, but they did not see the grain team. The people sent to receive the grain team fell into the enemy's ambush. The enemy gave them a head-on blow. They were beaten until they did not know which way was north. When Chui received the news, he was so angry that he fainted. The main culprit, Li Yun, led the soldiers in his tent back to the camp happily. He thought that this was an ordinary meritorious service. He did not expect that his lord would give him a great merit. The enemy's scale was not large and their combat power was not strong. Li Yun was practically suppressing them without any pressure. He did not expect that he would make a great contribution. Chapter 1674. Faced with Li Yun's question, Jiang Pingji remained silent for a second. Neither. No. Li Yun was even more puzzled. He could be considered an old official who had followed Jiang Pingji to conquer the world. He knew very well the gentleness and patience hidden under the cold, calculating surface of his lord. Li Yun casually asked, "I don't deserve a reward if I haven't done anything. Naturally, it is my honor for my lord to reward me. However, I do not deserve this military merit of unknown origin. My lord, why don't you explain it to me so that I know where the credit comes from?" Jiang Pingji couldn't help but roll her eyes at Li Yun. She joked, "You can't figure it out? If you can't figure it out, I'll take back the credit." "Don't, master." Seeing the cooked duck fly away, Li Yun's expression immediately dropped. He had an extremely disappointed look on his face. Jiang Pingji didn't have to look to know that the bullet screen in the streaming room would be full of "Little Angel Han Mei touch me, little Angel Han Mei don't cry, ow ow ow, how can a little angel be so cute? Streamer, I advise you to be kind, don't bully my little angel." One had to admit that Li Yun did have the capital to rely on his beauty and cuteness. He had perfectly inherited the good features of his parents and had always been one of the plastic surgery templates for male stars in the entertainment circle in Salted Fish's world. Even though he was approaching his 30s, his face hadn't changed much from when he first saw him. The older people get, the less attractive they look. But the older Li Yun got, the more attractive he looked. When he smiled brightly, he looked like a sunny and healthy Prince Charming. He was good at both literature and martial arts, handsome and cute. Once he put on a straight face, there was no need for him to pretend to be aloof. His temperament also made him look dignified without being angry. He was a cold and aloof Prince Charming. The key was that he looked slender, but the muscles under his clothes made people want to vomit blood. Such a contrast made the group of salted fishes love her even more. Of course, salted fishes were a group of mystical existences. Some claimed to be Li Yun's mother fans, some claimed to be his career fans, some claimed to be his girlfriend fans. What was even more mystical were the poison junkies. Jiang Pingji had seen a couple articles on the bullet screen about the cute and sunny Han Mei and the cold and aloof General Li Yun. The slogan of this group of fans was that they couldn't get Li Yun. If others couldn't get Li Yun, then let Li Yun suffer the consequences of his own actions. Jiang Pingji was speechless. There was simply nothing to say. Under the strong request of her fans, Jiang Pingji was magnanimous and did not continue to make things difficult for Li Yun. "I'm just kidding. Do I look like someone who goes back on his word?" Jiang Pingji had always treated the generals who came from the military very well. Even if the military expenses were overspent every year and she had to use her private treasury to make up for it, she never mentioned cutting the military supplies. She was even more generous with the generals who could be of use. She never lacked rewards during the New Year and other festivals. This habit had been going on for so many years. How could it be possible to cheat and blackmail Li Yun's military merits? She said sternly, "Does Han Mei know who the troops you led attacked?" Li Yun saw that Jiang Pingji had become serious and could not help but retract his smile. He said in all seriousness, "I don't know about that." Jiang Pingji was dumbfounded. "If An Shui heard what you said, he would most likely vomit blood in anger." "Why?" Li Yun asked when he did not understand. Jiang Pingji said, "You ambushed them by chance. You didn't plan it beforehand, but An Shui and the others didn't know about it. It was precisely because it was unintentional that it was even more infuriating." Li Yun's luck had always been good. This time, he had relied on his strength and luck to deal a heavy blow to the shaky morale of the enemy troops. Unfortunately, it was not Li Yun's intention. It was just a coincidence. If An Shui knew about this, wouldn't he be so angry that he would jump up in rage? If it was more serious, he might be so angry that he would have a cerebral hemorrhage. Li Yun could not understand Jiang Pingji's bad taste. He straightforwardly stabbed An Shui in the back. Even without this incident, An Shui wouldn't have been able to jump around for long. How can his failure be attributed to bad luck? To put it bluntly, An Shui's strength was insufficient. Why was he talking about luck as a fig leaf? Jiang Pingji held back her laughter and said, Han Mei's words are quite reasonable." An Shui was in urgent need of military rations, but Hua Yuan, who was at the rear, intentionally delayed. Coupled with Jiang Pingji's precise attacks, An Shui had lost more than he won in the past 6 months. He was swallowed up by Jiang Pingji every few days. In the past 6 months, Shui had lost a considerable amount of territory. The front lines suffered successive defeats, and the supply of military rations was intermittent. In the end, they could only mix human flesh with military rations to delay time. They never expected that the large amount of rations they had high hopes for would not arrive on time. The troops sent to receive the rations were even intercepted and killed by Li Yun and his men. One could imagine the heavy blow to their morale. If not for the fact that they were in different camps, the salted fish in the live stream would sympathize with Shui. Zhuo de Mani Manicure, Sai, which elder named Boss Shui. He really spent his entire life trying to explain how unlucky the word Shui was. Even though he later chose the word Duo Shi, he still could not change his fate in this lifetime. Although I'm a hardcore fan of the streamer's camp, seeing how unlucky his opponent was, I could not help but want to climb over the wall to sympathize with him for 3 seconds. The salted fish had long been displeased with Shui's name. Which elder would give their child the name Shui? Shui meant worry. He was destined to be unlucky for the rest of his life. Meng Meng de Xiaobai Tu, Shui with the word Duo Shi. This naming style was quite common in ancient times. For example, Lu Guo with the word Gaoji. The meaning of a name is the opposite of the word. It is both a warning and a restriction, but also a blessing. Of course, looking at it now, Shui's name was indeed not well chosen. Fu Chi Duo Duo, the level of education of the father's generation can be seen from their names. Lu Shi with the word Lanting, Li Yun with the word Hanmei, Feng Jin with the word Huayu. Which one of them was not pleasing to the ear, beautiful in writing and perfect in meaning? However, Shui was a maverick and was destined to fail. The salted fish complained to their heart's content. Anyway, only they and Jiang Pingji could see the bullet screen. Shui could not see it, so what was there to be afraid of? Indeed, Shui could not see it. So, was this the only consolation they had? Why haven't the rations been delivered yet? Even if Shui trusted Hua Yuan so much, when Hua Yuan did not perform well and endangered his life and ambitions, all his trust in him collapsed. Although there was an enemy ambush along the way, how could such a small ambush intercept the rations team? When Shui was dissatisfied with Hua Yuan, he disliked him in every way. He wished he could drag him in front of him and roar at him. Unfortunately, Hua Yuan was at the rear. It was extremely inconvenient to communicate between the two places, let alone pursue Hua Yuan's responsibility immediately. Shui's anger rose. The civil and military officials in his tent were also at their wits' end. It was not that they were incompetent, but even the cleverest housewife could not cook a meal without rice. How could they fight a war without rations? Of course, in the early stages when there was sufficient rations, they did not gain any advantage from Fu Wang and the others. Now that there was a shortage of rations, they had even more reasons to find excuses for their defeat. At that moment, an official who was on good terms with Lu Zheng stepped forward and said, "Has my lord ever suspected Hua Yuan?" Chapter 1675. Your Highness, why don't you think about it? When Advisor Lu was in charge of the army provisions, he never made such a huge mistake. Ever since Lu Zheng had been frozen, all sorts of problems had popped up. Shui didn't want to hear this. If he acknowledged Lu Zheng's ability and denied Hua Yuan, wouldn't that be slapping him in the face and admitting that he didn't know people well? In Shui's opinion, Hua Yuan's ability was not inferior to Lu Zheng's. However, they specialized in different fields and couldn't be compared. The official didn't have mind-reading skills and naturally didn't know what Shui was thinking. Advisor Lu has been assisting you since you were insignificant, Your Highness. He's been diligent and conscientious all these years, never slacking off for a single day. Your Highness, why don't you think about all the battles you've fought all these years? When did there ever be a problem with provisions? He continued, not noticing that Shui's expression had darkened. On the other hand, Hua Yuan made such a huge mistake this time. Advisor Lu also said that Hua Yuan had disloyalty and was especially wary of him. Shui said, "The most important thing now is how to get through this, not shirk responsibility." What's the point of saying all this? The official choked on Shui's words. It was Shui who had reprimanded Hua Yuan first. He hadn't started this topic, but now it was his fault? He wanted to defend himself, but someone tugged on his sleeve, indicating that he should return to his seat and stop arguing with Shui. Regardless of whether Hua Yuan had a problem or not, it was unwise to raise doubts now. Not only would it draw hatred to Lu Zheng, but it would also indirectly question Shui's ability to judge people. Your subject misspoke. The situation was not in his favor. After bowing, the official silently returned to his seat. Everyone continued to be gloomy. They weren't immortals and couldn't make food appear out of thin air. They'd already scavenged most of the provisions nearby. They could only hope that Hua Yuan would quickly replenish the supplies. Who knew that Hua Yuan would stand them up? Not only did he stand them up, he didn't even give them an explanation. More than one person muttered in his heart at this scene. Was there really nothing wrong with Hua Yuan? Was this guy really not a spy sent by the enemy? Or perhaps Hua Yuan really didn't want to rebel? The atmosphere in the tent froze for a long time. No one could think of a solution. At this moment, a report came from outside the tent. And Chui's face was dark as he asked. And Chui asked with a sinister look in his eyes, "What is it?" The soldier handed over a bamboo tube with both hands and said, "Before military advisor Lu left, he told me to give this to the Lord." Before leaving? Did Lu Jing leave the barracks? When did this happen? Why didn't they hear anything? Some of them looked confused, but Chui knew, because he was the one who allowed Lu Zheng to leave the camp. Lu Zheng's condition worsened. If he continued to stay in the barracks, he wouldn't receive good care. It was very likely that he would die of illness in the barracks. And Chui didn't want to be known as a heartless person, so he agreed to LV Zheng's request and sent him to a village dozens of miles away to recuperate. This wasn't a big deal. Of course Chui wouldn't publicize it. What is it? Chui had someone present the item. He opened the lid of the bamboo tube and took out a neatly folded piece of paper. He casually swept a glance and immediately got up from the mat in shock. It was impossible to count on Hua Yuan to deliver food, but Chui could set his sights on the enemy granaries. It was not that no one had mentioned this suggestion before, but the feasibility of implementing it was too low because they did not know the location of Jiang Pingji's granary. It was also impossible to count on a sneak attack on the granary to make Jiang Pingji unable to recover. Everyone in the world knew that Jiang Pingji was a crafty person with 3 burrows. She would never leave her military supplies in one place and wait for the enemy to plunder them all at once. However, if they knew the location of the enemy's provisions, even if there was only one location, they could temporarily solve the food crisis if the raid was successful. Chui didn't expect the sickly Lu Zheng to leave him such a huge surprise before he left. However, after his ecstasy came hesitation and doubt. Lu Zheng had been staying in his tent and hadn't left. Even if he was a divine strategist, it was impossible for him to know the location of the enemy's granary, right? If this information was true, why did he only bring it out now? Chui was hesitant, but the officials in his tent were very curious about what was written in the letter that made Chui react so strongly. Could it be a brilliant plan to break out of the situation? Everyone's hearts were pounding, but Chui didn't open his mouth to explain, so they didn't want to disturb him. Chui took a deep breath and made up his mind to make the letter public so that everyone could read it. "My lord, this is a good opportunity. If the sneak attack was successful, they would be able to obtain a large amount of provisions, enough for the army to slowly retreat and plan their next move. This is good news, but why does the chief public security officer look unhappy?" A few people with sharp eyes and bright minds guessed correctly. It was most likely that Chui's paranoia had flared up again and he was judging Lu Zheng with biased eyes. When they thought about it, they really pitied Lu Zheng. Hua Yuan had courted death with all his might, but Chui could speak up for him, while Lu Zheng was repeatedly doubted. Everyone thought so, but Chui didn't say anything, so they couldn't do anything. Because there was really no other way, Chui still took Lu Zheng's suggestion and attacked the granary at night. Little did they know, this was someone's scheme within a scheme. The burlap sack covering Lu Zheng's head was removed. The not-so-dazzling light made Lu Zheng's face look even gloomier. Before he could adjust to the light around him, he heard a call that he hadn't heard for many years. "Xiaoyin, how have you been?" Jiang Pingji's smug smile that hadn't changed much was magnified in front of his eyes. Lu Zheng's hands were tied behind his back, and he was half sitting on the ground. His hair was messy and he looked pathetic. "Where's my daughter?" Even though they hadn't seen each other for many years, Lu Zheng recognized her as soon as he saw her smiling face. "So that girl is your daughter? She's a girl after all. How can she be treated like you?" Jiang Pingji squatted down and leveled her gaze with Lu Zheng. She smiled and said, "She's been tied up and placed somewhere else. I'm not a heartless person like Chui. I won't be cruel to the family of my enemy. Speaking of which, your daughter is really pretty. She doesn't look like your child at all." Lu Zheng took a deep breath and tasted the pain in his stomach that he hadn't felt in a long time. He pretended to be calm and said, "Because she's my adopted daughter." I quite like that little girl. She treats you extremely well. She's still biting people even when she's tied up. She doesn't let anyone touch a single hair on your body. After hearing this, Lu Zheng's terrible mood eased a little. In this cold and heartless world, only his adopted daughter could give him some comfort. Jiang Pingji said, "More than half a year ago I asked Buku to pass a message to you, but you didn't reply to me directly. Are you trying to go back on your word?" A message from Fangji? Thinking of this, Lu Zheng's expression darkened. This guy had really slept with Zixiao. He's just a prisoner. You can do whatever you want with him. Jiang Pingji sighed. Everything was fine in the past. Xiaoyin, you're treating me like an outsider. You know very well that based on our relationship I can touch anyone but you. If you're not willing to submit to me, I'll set you free and let Master Yuanjing keep an eye on you. Lu Jing gave her a sidelong glance. Only a ghost would believe her nonsense. Where's Zixiao? I touched him. Jiang Pingji rested her chin on her hand and said, Your touching is different. Lu Zheng couldn't take it anymore. Lu Lanting, don't talk dirty at a time like this. Chapter 1676. I haven't seen you in years. I missed you so much that I couldn't help but tease you. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and chuckled. She untied the rope that bound LV Zheng and tossed it aside. LV Zheng shivered and his eyebrows twitched. His expression seemed to be on the verge of breaking down and enduring. He leaned back slightly to avoid her approach. Now that his hands were free, he couldn't help but rub his sore wrists as he said in a slightly uncomfortable tone. Lu Lanting, do you still think of yourself as a 12 or 13-year-old? This was the military camp, not a brothel where she drank and listened to music. She could not be so unrestrained. If I walk among the crowd, it's an exaggeration to say that I'm 12 or 13-year-old, but I can still say that I'm 15 or 16. Jiang Pingji teased him with a smile. If I remember correctly, you're about the same age as Zixiao, but you look much more haggard than he does. People will believe you if you add 10 years to your age. Enqui is a troublesome person. You've helped him clean up his mess all these years, haven't you? You wake up earlier than the chickens, sleep later than the dogs, and do more than the oxen. You really live up to the saying, sleepless all day and night, wasted in the morning. LV Zheng looked up at Jiang Pingji. In a trance, he had the illusion that time and space were in disarray. The person standing in front of him was still the noble youth in brocade clothes. It was as if the person in front of him had stayed in the past. More than 10 years had not left a mark on her. Your mouth is still as unforgiving as ever. You always like to pester others endlessly. When she was 12 or 13, she was pestering others endlessly. That was called naive, cute, and innocent. More than 10 years had passed, but she was still pestering others endlessly. He was not Wei Zixiao. Why would he indulge her? I'm arguing with reason. I'm presenting facts and reasoning. Since when was I pestering others endlessly? Jiang Pingji extended her hand and said, My tent is indeed clean, but the mud is dirty. How long do you plan to sit on the ground? Aren't you afraid of the cold? LV Zheng looked at her hand and tried hard to suppress the urge to slap it away. You're a scholar. I've taught you for 3 years. I didn't teach you to talk about Enqui every day. Jiang Pingji could not help but laugh. I thought you would say something like, You're a girl after all, don't be so vulgar. Even now, there were still people who liked to make an issue out of her gender. Even if it wasn't intentional, they would still subconsciously pull out her gender. Jiang Pingji didn't mind because they were all outsiders and outsiders that she looked down on. If Lu Zheng was like this, she would be very disappointed. LV Zheng raised his eyes to look at Jiang Pingji's face. She was wearing a short, round-collared robe that was made of stone. She still looked capable and neat as usual, coupled with her handsome face, affectionate eyes, and half-smile. At first glance, she looked more like a young man from an aristocratic family with a romantic temperament. There were no feminine labels that people were familiar with on her, such as delicate and lovely, dignified and generous, but it was undeniable that she was indeed a woman, and she embodied another kind of rare beauty of women. Don't you know what you look like? Lu Zheng admired her in his heart, but his words were unforgiving. He grabbed Jiang Pingji's hand and stood up with her strength. Because LV Zheng was still sick, he felt dizzy when he suddenly stood up and he almost fell forward. Jiang Pingji helped him up. LV Zheng tilted his head to look at her profile, and he muttered to himself. He hadn't recognized her gender back then, not because he and the people around him had made a mistake, but because she looked too good. Did Shui not give you meat to eat for the past 6 months? When they shook hands, she realized that LV Zheng was slimmer than she had expected. His palms were almost devoid of flesh. Zishao was also thin, but some flesh could be squeezed out. LV Zheng, on the other hand, was a bag of bones. More than half a year ago, Jiang Pingji sent Fang Ji to persuade LV Zheng. Fang Ji returned in low spirits, but he also brought Jiang Pingji a lot of news. According to Fang Ji's description, LV Zheng had been frozen by Shui, but his situation wasn't very bad. He ate, drank, slept well, and even put on some weight. Looking at him now, he wasn't fat at all. If there was a typhoon outside, she could tie a rope around LV Zheng's neck and let him fly in the sky. Don't mention meat. It's nauseating. Even though he didn't swallow the meat porridge, he tasted it. Every time he thought about it, it made his stomach turn. After a short period of dizziness, LV Zheng stood up straight and let go of her hand. He observed her secretly. Just like Jiang Pingji's narcissism, she hadn't changed much over the years. Previously, LV Zheng had rejected Fang Ji's persuasion. LV Zheng didn't agree to recruit him, but he also took the opportunity to catch up with his classmate. The two middle-aged men who were already in their 30s, gathered together to chat by candlelight and reminisce about the past. They sighed with emotion and also talked about the situation of the Langia F5 heavenly group. From a teenager to a young man to a middle-aged man, everyone except Jiang Pingji had changed beyond recognition. The shy and lofty Fang Ji had been tempered by reality into a steady and dignified country teacher. The hot-bloodedness that had been boiling in his chest during his youth had been defeated by reality. Jiang Mo, who was addicted to 2D paper dolls and loved all kinds of fire-repelling maps, and had a slightly cowardly personality, had become a profound, introverted, and reliable clan leader of the Shi family. He, who had been noisy and refused to submit to his family in the past, had also followed the example of his parents. Ma Xiu, a wealthy gentleman with good farmland and no worries about food and drink, had been affected by the chaos of war. His farmland had been occupied and plundered by bandits who rose to power. In order to avoid disaster, he had no choice but to move his family north. There had been no news of him for many years. Of course, the three of them hadn't changed much. Among the five, Jiang Pingji and LV Zheng had changed the most. Jiang Pingji, who was the most hedonistic and mischievous, had become a vassal of the world. LV Zheng, who had the potential to be a nationalistic youth and was biased against the gentry, had become Jiang Pingji's strategist for the safety of her family. Now he had become Jiang Pingji's prisoner. Life was really interesting. No one knew what their future would be like until the very last moment. Okay. I won't talk about it anymore. Jiang Pingji's observation skills weren't just for show. She could tell from LV Zheng's reaction that he was hiding something. Naturally, she wouldn't continue to provoke him. An appropriate amount of playfulness was called playfulness. Excessive playfulness was called enmity. Look at your sickly and haggard appearance. It's better to stay in the military camp and wait for the war to end. Recuperate. Maybe I'll let you see your old master for the last time. After Jiang Pingji finished speaking, she suddenly remembered something. Right, I have something to tell you. LV Zheng was well aware of Jiang Pingji's arrangements, so he wasn't surprised. However, what she said made LV Zheng a little flustered for no reason. What's the matter? Jiang Pingji said, I asked for something from your adopted daughter. LV Zheng raised his eyebrows and asked, What is it? Jiang Pingji said, Your study notes. What do you want that for? Chapter 1677. Send his former master back to heaven? Lu Jing didn't know what to do for a moment, but he was smart enough to figure out what she had done in no time. Lu Lanting. Lu Jing pointed at her. He was so angry that his hand was trembling. Jiang Pingji had a smile on her face. She raised her hand unhurriedly and pushed his hand aside. What are you trying to say? Are you despicable? Or are you cunning? She laughed. There's nothing too deceitful in a war. On the battlefield, all kinds of scheming methods were allowed. The only thing that mattered was who was more skilled. I'm just taking advantage of the situation to achieve my goal. Moreover, I'm giving you a credit so that you can quickly gain a foothold here. Lu Jing said, Do you think I, Lu Xiaoyin, am a fickle and petty person who forgets about morality for the sake of profit? Lu Jing knew what Jiang Pingji had done. It was definitely a trap that could bury Shui alive. I've never doubted your character, but a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in, and a virtuous official chooses a master to serve. Do you not know what kind of person Duoshi is? Whether he's worthy of you hanging him with a piece of white silk? Jiang Pingji said confidently, If you're a foolishly loyal person, just pretend I didn't say anything. Whether you stay or leave, I'll let you choose. Jiang Pingji naturally wanted to recruit Lu Zheng. No one would complain about having too many talented people. After a while, she would conquer Nanxing and rule over the 5 countries in the world. She would need more and more people. Lu Zheng knew her background, so he felt more at ease using her. He treated the surrendered officials of Langyi Academy well, and she was an alumnus of Langyi Academy. This was double insurance. Master Yuanjing had taught at Langyi Academy for many years. He had students all over the world and made friends with many famous scholars. With double insurance, it would be much easier to recruit people from this circle in the future. Jiang Pingji naturally would not fall out with Lu Zheng due to all these reasons. You're forcing me to betray An Shui. Lu Zheng had voluntarily given up on An Shui and Jiang Pingji had forced him to do so. She had even made him the scapegoat for betraying An Shui. Even if An Shui was a scumbag, Lu Zheng had chosen him. Even if it was a stone in the latrine pit, Lu Zheng didn't want to be forced to throw the stone back into the latrine pit. Jiang Pingji said, "How can this be considered as coercion? What I'm doing is a stratagem, a normal confrontation of schemes. If no one in An Shui's camp sees through it, even if they fall into the pit and die, it's their own fault. We can only blame ourselves for being too weak and stupid. How can we blame the enemy for being too strong and smart?" Lu Zheng took a deep breath and asked, "What did you do to imitate my handwriting?" Even if LV Zheng did not like to praise Jiang Pingji, she would open a dye house just because he gave her some color. LV Zheng had to admit that she deserved to be envied by the heavens. She had a talent for imitating others. Based on what Jiang Pingji had just said, it wasn't difficult to deduce that Jiang Pingji must have taken the books he had written recently. Based on the handwriting on them, she imitated the letters to lure An Shui. As for LV Zheng, was not sure what the contents of the letter were and what trap Jiang Pingji had dug. Jiang Pingji said, "Oh, I'm helping him come up with strategies and share his burdens. Isn't An Shui severely short of rations recently? There's a problem with the logistics rations, and the frontline army is facing the crisis of running out of rations. How can they fight a war when they don't have enough rations? So I imitated your handwriting and tone and came up with a simple idea. I asked him to lead his troops to attack my granary. I was worried that he wouldn't be able to find the way, so I specially drew a simple map." LV Zheng closed his eyes after listening to her. This was a fatal blow. How could An Shui take the bait? Jiang Pingji asked in return, "Why not? Xiaoyin, do you have any misunderstandings about your own weight? You're Master Yuanjing's student, a top student who graduated from Langyi Academy. You've assisted An Shui, a penniless stray dog, to accumulate the wealth you have today. Even if An Shui has given you the cold shoulder over the past 2 years and even detested you, he will instinctively trust you when he's in a life-and-death situation. Without your assistance, LV Xiaoyin, An Shui would still be a small character leading a few thousand grassroots troops. How could he have the glory he has today?" LV Zheng had helped An Shui launch a counterattack once, so he could naturally help him launch a counterattack a second time. Jiang Pingji said, "Xiaoyin, I imitated your handwriting and wrote a wonderful plan. It's bait. How could An Shui not take the bait?" LV Zheng was reluctant to admit it, but he had to admit in his heart that Jiang Pingji was right. An Shui had been forced into a dead end, and Hua Yuan was still stabbing him in the back. He had no other choice but to believe in the plan. Of course, An Shui was a cautious and suspicious person. He might not believe everything. "Aren't you afraid of going for wool and coming home shorn? You failed to ambush An Shui and you'll lose your granary? Why did LV Zheng, Qingjing, and the others have a problem with Jiang Pingji? Did the students of Langyi Academy not think highly of this schoolmate?" Purely from the perspective of character, Jiang Pingji was a rather likable person. Even if she was the most despicable, she knew her limits, which became her unique shining point. However, making friends and assisting a vassal were different. The criteria for judging the two were also different. Friends could be mischievous but the Lord could not. LV Zheng did not know how Wei Ci and the others tolerated it. For example, this time, she used her own granary as bait to lure An Shui. If the other party counterattacked, An Shui would not be afraid of anything, but what about her? Jiang Pingji revealed a somewhat weary and mocking smile. "Xiaoyin, you're underestimating me. I dared to set a trap, so naturally I have something to rely on." She asked in return, "Have you ever seen a banker lose?" LV Zheng's heart skipped a beat. This chaotic world has lasted for too long. It's time to end it. We'll start with Nanxing, then Zhongzhou. Once we take down these 2 countries, the remaining 2 are nothing to fear. Those who once looked down on me and hated me can only watch me ascend to the throne. It's quite satisfying to think about it. LV Jing knew that Jiang Pingji was not joking. What does this world mean to you? We're all old classmates. I won't say pretty things like, let the people live and work in peace and contentment, and clarify the chaotic world. Anyway, you can tell that I'm lying. Jiang Pingji said, as for me, I want those who are dead and alive to open their eyes wide and see who's qualified to be the ruler of the world. Those who aren't convinced should hold it in. At the same time, I'll open their eyes and see what the real golden age looks like. Apart from me, none of them can do it. Not only will the predecessors be left in the dust, but the successors will also not be able to catch up. LV Jing spat out 2 words softly. Arrogant. His ambition was written all over his face. Jiang Pingji made a gesture of shaking off her cigarette smoke. She smiled and raised her eyebrows. Xiaoyin, I'll give you a warning. LV Jing was speechless. Even though he did not know what a warning from Xinxiang was, he had a feeling that it would not be anything good. Recuperate well. I'm going to meet an old friend. Chapter 1678. I'd like to see Zixiao. Jiang Pingji didn't find Lu Zheng's request excessive, so she agreed. Anything else? My adopted daughter likes you very much, but she had a rough childhood and has a strange temperament. If she offends you in any way, please forgive her and ask the soldiers under your command to treat her better. Lu Zheng pondered for 3 seconds and said hesitantly, she's a child with a hard life. Jiang Pingji's gaze revealed some surprise. She thought Lu Zheng would say something else, such as rebuking her or asking about her attitude toward An Shui. She never expected him to plead for his adopted daughter. Jiang Pingji didn't pay attention to Kang Xintong at first, but since Lu Zheng said so, she naturally had to take care of her. She paid more attention to her. I'll send someone to send her to you. You can supervise her together and save some manpower. Jiang Pingji's words sounded impolite, but LV Jing knew what she was really trying to express. Kang Xintong was Lu Zheng's adopted daughter, so she took care of him more meticulously than others. She placed Kang Xintong under his watch so that Lu Zheng wouldn't worry about his adopted daughter's situation when he was sick. Jiang Pingji arranged for Lu Zheng to recuperate in a secluded place. She also reminded the doctor not to be stingy with medicine and to use whatever was useful. When Wei Ci heard the news and rushed over, Lu Zheng was wearing a greenish-gray cloak and kneeling in front of the chessboard playing chess. Sometimes he furrowed his brows in deep thought, sometimes he was suddenly enlightened, and sometimes he pointed at the chessboard to calculate something. He didn't look like a prisoner at all. Wei Ci saw that Lu Zheng looked sick and said disapprovingly, I heard that you're very sick. Why don't you wait on the bed? Instead of resting, he was playing chess. Any doctor who encountered such an uncooperative patient would be angry. Lu Zheng had long heard Wei Ci's movements. When he heard Wei Ci scolding him, he looked up at him. You haven't changed much over the years. Lu Zheng placed the chess record by his side and gestured for Wei Ci to sit on the mat opposite him. Wei Ci almost didn't recognize him. Lu Zheng looked much more haggard than he imagined. He was in low spirits and his hair was visibly gray. There was not much of a difference in their ages, but when Wei Ci and Lu Zheng were compared, the latter seemed to be almost 10 years older than the former. Wei Ci said frankly, you look much older. LV Zheng had the urge to treat the chess piece as Wei Ci and crush it. One is marked by the company one keeps, one is blackened by the company one keeps. Lu Zheng was implying something. Wei Ci had been with Jiang Pingji for a long time. How did his glib tongue change toward the latters? Wei Ci did not know about the bet between Jiang Pingji and LV Zheng, but he was good at reading people's minds. LV Zheng's words carried a subtle meaning. After hesitating for 3 breaths, Wei Ci asked cautiously, does Xiaoyin know? It's hard not to know. Lu Zheng's fingernails were well manicured. At this moment he was playing with a black chess piece, which made his fingernails look even paler. He placed the chess piece in the designated position and said, how could Lu Xi be worthy of your attention? Back then you were quite distant from her. After all, they were from the same sect and were taught by the same teacher. Lu Zheng's understanding of Wei Ci was incomparable to that of an outsider. In the eyes of an outsider, they might think that Jiang Pingji was forcing Wei Ci and that Wei Ci had no choice but to succumb to her tyrannical power. However, Lu Zheng understood that if Wei Ci had no intentions towards others, he would not easily succumb even if a knife was placed on his neck, let alone using force. The two of them had an affair. It could only be said that both of them were interested in each other. Not to mention Jiang Pingji, Lu Zheng had heard Jiang Pingji say that she would drag Wei Xi down with her 800 years ago. But what about Wei Xi? When did he develop feelings for Jiang Pingji that were beyond that of a ruler and an official? Wei Xi said, maybe it was in my previous life. He told the truth, but Lu Zheng thought that he was being glib. Instead of learning from the good, you learn from the bad. Are you learning from Lu Xi in your eloquence? Lu Zheng gestured for Wei Xi to choose a chess piece to play with him. Among his fellow apprentices, Wei Xi's chess skills were the best among them. Lu Zheng was ranked last and was often beaten by Wei Xi, Qing Jing and Han Yu. The shadows of his school days were Jiang Pingji and Wei Xi's, playing a game of chess with their hands. He was always beaten badly. In order to avenge his previous humiliation, he put in a lot of effort in this aspect. He did not know if he could gain an advantage today. Wei Xi was speechless. No one believed him when he told the truth. It was not easy to be an honest person. The two of them did not talk much. They just played 2 games in silence. Lu Zheng still lost miserably. After cleaning up the mess, Lu Zheng looked up at Wei Xi, whose temperament was becoming more and more stable. He was like a pearl that had been polished until it became rounder. Although it was not dazzling, it could not be ignored. This person looked like a decent person. Who could guess that he had tons of evil ideas in his mind? I will be careful about the matter with the Lord. I will try not to affect her as much as possible. I will also try to protect myself. He wanted to accompany her until her hair turned white and she died of old age. Both of them would be fine. Lu Zheng nodded. My teacher often says that you have your own views. Since you have said so, you must have made up your mind. It is not good for outsiders to persuade you. He was Wei Xi's fellow apprentice, so his standpoint was naturally more biased towards Wei Xi. As long as it was Wei Xi's own choice, Lu Zheng would respect it. But he could have chosen anyone to have a relationship with, but he chose Jiang Pingji, who was the most difficult to conquer. She was a vassal now, but she would become an emperor in the future. Her identity meant that if Wei Xi wanted to walk to her side, there would be thorns under his feet. Maybe he would kneel halfway. Thank you. Wei Xi's words came from the bottom of his heart. Whether it was Lu Zheng, Qing Jing or Han Yu, their respect and understanding warmed Wei Xi's heart. Lu Zheng stroked the cold chess piece and let out a sigh. He said to Wei Xi, I know that you have a soft temperament and some things can't be said openly. Since we are from the same school, I will say one more thing. Lu Xi's temperament is different from ordinary people. If you really want to be in harmony with her, remember this. Don't get involved in anything. In the future, whether it is the civil and military infighting or the struggle between the gentry and the common people, you'd better not intervene and don't express your opinion. If you really can't help it, it is best to ask for Lu Xi's opinion. Don't do anything that goes against her will. Ordinary couples have some difficulties and quarrels at most. But if you have a conflict with Lu Xi, it will affect more than just a small family. Lu Zheng's words were not only the way of a ruler and a minister, but also the way of a husband and wife. As long as Wei Xi always stood by her side and supported her, their interests would be firmly bound. Harming Wei would be harming Jiang Pingji's interests. In this way she would become Wei Xi's most powerful shield. Wei Xi was stunned after hearing that. If he had understood this in his previous life, he would not have thought himself clever and got involved in the affairs of the Wei family. Would the meteorite have fallen from the sky? Most likely not. Chapter 1679. If Lu Zheng and the others were still alive in his previous life, they might have pointed out the right path for Wei Xi like they were doing now. The onlookers saw the game more clearly than the onlookers. Their advice was what Wei Xi needed the most so that he would not take the wrong path. However, it was not too late now. He had learned his lesson from his previous life and would not repeat the same mistake in this life. Don't be ostentatious. That's for the best. Otherwise, you'll become the target of public criticism. Lu Zheng rubbed the chess piece and smiled. Look at Lu Xi's subordinates. Other than those from Lang Yi's faction, the others may not be very friendly to you. Without a handle, they will have fewer reasons to attack you. Even if Wei Xi was from an academy, if he stood in their way, he might be stabbed in the back. To put it bluntly, interests were the foundation of a relationship. If their interests were the same, they would be allies forever. Wei Xi coughed lightly and reminded him, My lord doesn't like to form cliques. Because of this, Yumo is still helping my teacher. Qing Jing refused to become an official mainly because he was worried that he would implicate his fellow disciples from Lang Yi Academy. When Lu Zheng casually said the words Lang Yi's faction, Wei Xi trembled with fear. It's one thing to dislike him, but it's another thing to form a clique. Lu Shi's temperament was too wild and arrogant. She might not take the so-called clique seriously. So what if they form cliques? Can they escape her grasp? As long as they do not cross the line, she will most likely not make a big fuss. If they cross the line, even if they do nothing, she will still find a reason to get rid of them. Yumo is too cautious. Lu Jing sneered. That's why. Lu Lanting is really not a likable person. Humility and politeness were the main qualities. Someone like Jiang Pingji, who could not wait to write, "I'm the best in the world," on her face to attract hatred, was naturally not likable. She was a heretic. Lu Jing even had some malicious thoughts. He hoped that Jiang Pingji would fail miserably. Sooner or later she will fail miserably. If she failed miserably, he wondered what expression she would have. Although he did not want to admit it, he had to admit that Lu Zheng's judgment was correct. Whether it was His Majesty in his previous life or his lord in this life, both were so confident that they were conceited. Why would she care about the clique of her subordinates? If someone really did violate her taboo by forming a clique, needless to say, they would end up with weeds growing 3 feet high on their graves. Thinking back to his past life, the relationship between the officials and the imperial court was indeed a little subtle. Wei Ci even suspected that the other party had deliberately allowed the officials to form a clique. If they stepped over her bottom line, she would strike violently and wipe them all out. Thinking along this line of thought, it was extremely terrifying. The Jiang dynasty had been established for 18 years. During this period of time, there had been several changes of power, and every time there was the shadow of His Majesty enforcing the law, toying with the entire imperial court with the strength of one person. Lu Zheng wanted to see his lord fail miserably in such an easy task, but he was probably daydreaming. Why don't Xiaoyin give her more confidence? Wei Ci said, "She can do it." Lu Zheng had an indescribable expression on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "The husband follows the wife. I'm afraid of you." Wei Ci pursed his lips and smiled faintly. The light enveloped him, and it seemed that even his skin was suffused with a faint halo. He looked like a deity. How could there be such a good-looking man in this world? Kang Xintong suddenly thought. Wei Ci's smile froze halfway. Look, who did he discover? Wei Ci's expression was as usual. Lu Zheng waved at his adopted daughter, who was standing in the corridor and did not dare to enter the house. "Xintong, come over and meet Uncle Master." Kang Xintong only came back to her senses when she heard the summons. She hurriedly but restrained herself and bowed. "Niece greets Uncle Master." Lu Zheng introduced, "I adopted her a while ago. She's smart and talented. The key is that she's filial and sensible. What do you think, Zixiao?" He was like a father showing off his daughter and gleefully looked forward to hearing praises from Wei Ci. Wei Ci secretly raised his eyebrows. "What's her name?" Kang Xintong said, "My niece's surname is Kang. My courtesy name is Xintong." Wei Ci pretended to be curious and asked, "Where did Xiaoyin find such a lovely adopted daughter?" Lu Zheng thought that Wei Ci had misunderstood this father-daughter relationship, and explained vaguely, "In the future, I still need to count on her to provide for me when I'm old. Naturally, I have to find a filial daughter. As for where I found her, I can only say that it's fate. She's the only one in the world. You can't be envious." Many rich families did not have the right to take in concubines. However, there were policies and countermeasures. There would always be people who could find loopholes and come up with excuses. For example, adopted daughter, or study boy. They could be very pure characters, but they could also be special characters with other colors. Lu Zheng said the words "provide for me when I'm old." Naturally, this father-daughter relationship was very serious. "It's our first time meeting. I'm not prepared." Wei Ci fished out a small thing from his sleeve and gave it to Kang Xintong. His gentle gaze fell on the latter and he said apologetically, "This gift is a little shabby. I'll give you a formal one in the future." Kang Xintong did not take it. She secretly observed Lu Zheng's expression and only accepted it happily when he nodded. Lu Zheng said, "This Uncle Master of yours is a rare talent in the world. If I don't have time to teach you, you can look for him. When the day comes that you've drained all the ink in his stomach and stirred up a storm in the future, there will be a place for you. Learn more, understand?" "Yes, I understand." Wei Ci smiled awkwardly but politely. The future saint of the Red Lotus group had become his niece. Could the world be more magical? As it turned out, there was. When he saw Kang Xintong pour him tea and obediently, Wei Ci felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. His memories of the past decades were all blurred. Only some special events and people were as vivid as before. Kang Xintong was one of them. As a serious rebel, Kang Shintong had a close relationship with many courtiers as the saint of the Red Lotus group. She knew their weaknesses and was a criminal that needed special treatment. If one wanted to dig out secrets from such a person's mouth, they would have to be tortured. Many people could not endure it and gave up, but Kang Shintong was an exception. Wei Xi could not be bothered to investigate Kang Shintong's background. In his opinion, she was a traitor. Coincidentally, Kang Shintong was also unwilling to reveal her unbearable past to gain sympathy. She was stubborn and stubborn. As long as I'm still breathing, don't even think about getting a word out of me. After 3 days of torture, she had almost tasted all the punishments in the dungeon, but she still did not give up a single word. Wei Xi presented this matter to His Majesty. His Majesty was interested and condescended to take a look at the dungeon. His Majesty looked at Kang Shintong, who was bathed in prison clothes, and said softly, "Why bring the secret underground and use your life to cover up the crimes of those people? I thought that the Red Lotus group was just a motley crew. They knew nothing but dancing and playing tricks. I didn't expect there to be an exception like you." Kang Shintong coughed up blood and said mockingly, "If I don't tell them, they will live in fear and remember me for the rest of their lives." His Majesty raised his eyebrows. "If you die, everyone in the world remembers. But if I die, it will be as quiet as an ant disappearing. If they can remember me, then I won't have lived in vain." His Majesty said, "I understand. Do you have any wishes?" Kang Shintong would rather die than confess. There was no value in continuing to torture this kind of criminal. Chapter 1680. You want to be cremated? Everyone thought death was the same as the soul. If cremation was used, it would be the same as burning the bones and scattering the ashes. Other than Kang Shintong, this was the first time Her Majesty heard someone ask for it. "When I was born, it was snowing heavily in Nanxing for 20 years. I heard from the servants that the sky and the earth were one color and the vast expanse of whiteness." After 3 consecutive days of torture, if Kang Shintong's willpower was not stronger than that of ordinary people, her soul would have long gone to hell. Her voice was as weak as a mosquito. Her words sounded more like she was talking to herself. "I've seen corpses rotting. Rotten flesh turning into water, maggots eating bones. No matter how beautiful a beauty is, she can't escape such an ending. I was born clean. I don't want to be dirty after death. Isn't it better to be burned?" Her Majesty said, "As you wish." In the end, Kang Shintong burned herself to death wearing the prisoner's clothes that were dyed red with blood like a wedding gown. No matter how many evil things this woman did when she was alive, death was like an extinguished lamp. Wei Xi saw her die in the raging fire with his own eyes, so he didn't continue to pay attention to her. Time flew and years came again. He didn't expect to see her again. Wei Xi thought that since there were so many changes in this life, Kang Shintong might have died early in the disaster of Nanman. Even if she survived, her fate would most likely be different from her previous life and she wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. He never expected that she would become Lu Zheng's adopted daughter. Wei Xi, who had always disliked gossiping, was a little curious. He beat around the bush and asked how Lu Zheng had managed to take them in. "Be a good husband." Lu Zheng looked at him sideways and warned him calmly, "You're a man with a family." Wei Xi almost choked on Lu Zheng's words. Just now there was a brotherly love between them. How did they end up hurting each other in the blink of an eye? He dared to bet that Lu Zheng learned the term husband's way from his lord. "What are you thinking about, Xiaoyin?" Wei Xi couldn't help but interrupt to prevent Lu Zheng from letting his imagination run wild. "I only saw that this woman's face is strange and her birth chart is also strange. That's why I asked. Since she's your adopted daughter, she's your junior. Why would an elder have any thoughts about a little girl who hasn't reached marriageable age? Moreover, this matter isn't something to joke about. My lord will take it seriously." Lu Zheng was stunned. He had forgotten that Wei Xi was a quack. There's something wrong with Shintong's physiognomy? After all, she was his adopted daughter, and LV Zheng did not want anything to happen to her. If he could avoid it, he would try his best to avoid it. Wei Xi said, "Beauties are full of ups and downs." Needless to say, Lu Zheng naturally understood. He faintly sighed and concisely explained Kang Shintong's past experiences. Wei Xi's words, "Beauties are full of ups and downs," matched Kang Shintong's previous experience. Naturally, Lu Zheng did not doubt it. This is also a child with a hard life. If it was possible, Lu Zheng naturally hoped that Kang Shintong would agree to his request. "You said that her appearance is strange and her birth chart is also strange. Could it be that there are other variables?" Was it a blessing or a curse? Will we be able to turn misfortunes into blessings in the future? Wei Xi said, she met a benefactor and her destiny changed greatly. It will be better than what she had originally planned. Lu Jing smiled and said, now that you've said that, I'm relieved. While they were talking, Kang Xintong had already prepared dinner. Wei Xi conveniently stayed behind to freeload. After dinner, the sky gradually darkened. Kang Xintong stood up to send Wei Xi off on behalf of her adoptive father, Lu Zheng. She was so nervous on the way that she could not speak. After she watched Wei Xi leave, she hurriedly went to look for her adoptive father. Adoptive father, are we going to stay here from now on? She had thought that she would be imprisoned, but she did not expect that the treatment after being captured by the enemy was better than staying at Shui's side. If she had known earlier, she would have continued to persuade her adoptive father to change jobs. Lu Zheng felt that it was better to have a short-term pain than a protracted one. He frowned and drank the bitter medicine. He did not know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the medicine prescribed by the doctor was much more bitter than the medicine he had drunk before. You look rather happy? Lu Zheng could not help but remind his adoptive daughter. They were now prisoners, what was there to be happy about? Kang Xintong said, I observed that martial uncle. He has a good temperament. If we become colleagues in the future, wouldn't it be much better than before? Lu Zheng was speechless. How much did his adoptive daughter despise her lord and Shui? After a while, Kang Xintong cleared the dishes for him and suddenly thought of something. Adoptive father, what's the matter? Speak. Kang Xintong asked, did Master Lanting personally come to recruit you? His adoptive father was a talented person with a strong presence. The Master of Lanting would surely come personally to show his respect. Lu Zheng turned to look at his adoptive daughter, an indescribable feeling in his heart. What if the child always sided with an outsider? Was fine. She was most likely retarded. A beating would be enough. Of course, Lu Zheng could not bring himself to beat the child. He could only suppress his feelings. It was not enough that Lu Lanting had harmed Wei Xi and him. Now that she had become capable, she had harmed his adoptive daughter. Ha, but what a sentimental and promiscuous woman. Lu Zheng sneered coldly. Jiang Pingji sneezed loudly. Her eyes looked even more watery. It was the season change, and the number of sick people was much higher than usual. Li Yun and the others were worried that their lord would be affected. They asked with concern, are you feeling unwell, my lord? Jiang Pingji waved her hand and rubbed her nose. I'm fine. My nose suddenly itched. Li Yun and the others relaxed when they saw that her expression was normal. Jiang Pingji said, tonight and Shui and the others will definitely send men to launch a sneak attack. Is the granary ready? Li Yun replied, General Fu has already brought men to set up an ambush. It's guaranteed that nothing will go wrong. And Shui had already run out of ammunition and food. Jiang Pingji had pointed out a clear path. And Shui, who had nowhere else to go, had no choice but to take the bait. Tell Jingtu not to be careless. Whether this battle can end cleanly depends on him, Jiang Pingji reminded him. Jiang Pingji exhorted. She had no intention of getting involved. Li Yun cupped his fists and said, understood. Jiang Pingji did not personally lead the troops to set up an ambush, but she did not wait quietly in the tent for news either. Howchi get to AZ? TSK, didn't the streamer say that she would not wander the battlefield? Yes, Hen Fengquang. Judging from the streamer's posture, it doesn't seem like she's going to lead the troops to smash in Shui's head. The idle people thought that Jiang Pingji was going to return to the martial world. Who knew that she would only lead 1,000 troops out to guard a certain mountain valley? Just as they were puzzled, Jiang Pingji opened her mouth to explain. Chapter 1681. After all, Jiang Pingji was born in the army. Even if she retired from the front line, it didn't mean that she was completely away from the battlefield. She just didn't take the lead like she used to. Zhang Jike's table tennis. Is the streamer worried that Fu Wang and the others will fail miserably? She's here to hold the line for them. Jiang Pingji said sarcastically, this credit is free. It's not difficult at all. If Fu Wang can't even handle such a small matter, he'll be sent back to his hometown to plant sweet potatoes. I'm worried about them? Why should I be worried about a few good-for-nothings? Yuang, #carrot. Carrot hashtag, I can't get tired of seeing the streamer's hypocritical and arrogant look. If you push Fu Wang to the end and send him back to his hometown to plant sweet potatoes, who will get Sister Huijuan's alimony, milk powder, diapers, and education fees? Even after so many years, the salted fish still couldn't let go of the fact that Fu Wang, the pig trotter, had stolen their love. For the sake of the cute twins, they reluctantly accepted Fu Wang. Jiang Pingji said, "Worried about them? No, I'm just supervising the battle." The salted fish were used to Jiang Pingji's hypocrisy. After all, the stubborn streamer was also their favorite. She was a treasure in the world. It was dark and quiet everywhere. Only the sound of the patrolling cavalry's hooves and the crackling of the torches could be heard. Fu Wang wore a dignified and heavy armor with beast rings. It made his burly body look like a small mountain. The march was tough. He could only squeeze out time to clean his face for half a month. The last time he shaved was 8 days ago. Because he hadn't shaved for a long time, the green stubble on his cheeks was a little long and messy. The helmet pressed against his stubble, making him very uncomfortable. If he wasn't rational, he would have pulled out the long knife at his waist and shaved his face. Xieze patrolled everywhere. When he came back to report, he found Fu Wang scratching his face from time to time. He thought he had been bitten by a mosquito in the forest. "I still have some insect repellent powder here. Would General Fu like to use some?" Xieze took off the medicine bag hanging at his waist and handed it to Fu Wang. Fu Wang was stunned. After 2 breaths, he realized Xieze had misunderstood. He waved his hand and said, "It's not a mosquito bite. I don't need it." Xieze looked surprised and asked curiously, "Then why does General Fu keep scratching his face?" Fu Wang said with some embarrassment, "My stubble is pricking my face and I didn't bring my razor with me." Xieze, what could he do? Naturally, he revealed an awkward but polite smile. Fu Wang was not considered young among the crowd, but everyone realized that he had yet to grow a beard. No matter how busy he was with the war, he would still squeeze out half a day to comb the stubble on his face. Although not growing a beard did not diminish Fu Wang's manliness, others always felt that something was missing. Xieze asked curiously. Fu Wang said faintly, "My family doesn't like it. They say it's irritating." The appearance of the twins took after Huijun. Their skin was tender and smooth. Fu Wang would sneak a kiss and it would always make the child cry. Over time, the child did not like to be close to him. In desperation, Fu Wang could only give up on the idea of growing a beard and shave every other day. It was fine if he didn't have a beard or had a long beard, but the most annoying thing was a beard that was neither too long nor too short, and the helmet stuck close to his face to protect his cheeks. Xieze said, "It sounds very envious." Fu Wang puffed out his chest and said, "Of course." Another advantage of not growing a beard was that he looked young. Ever since he had snuck into Huijuan's household, Fu Wang hated it when people talked about his age. Even though he was not much stronger than Huijun, the age difference still made Fu Wang feel insulted. He wished that they were the same age. The two of them chatted for a while before they tacitly stopped and talked about the results of the patrol. They all knew that they had to perform meritorious deeds tonight. They made a mistake. The Lord would skin them alive. Fu Wang was the most cowardly one. Why? Because he was henpecked. If Huijun knew that he was a burden to the Lord, the scene would be unimaginable. Fu Wang and the others were well prepared and naturally had a card up their sleeves. Everything was ready except for the enemy. Fu Wang did not wait long before the dull sound of horse hooves came from afar. To ensure the success of this ambush, the warhorse's hooves were tied with cloth strips to reduce the sound when they landed. "General Fu, there's movement. Iske, you really can't stand being talked about." A sneer appeared on Fu Wang's face as he suddenly stood up and mounted his horse. He ordered, "Send the order to inform everyone to be on high alert. Not a single fish can escape the net today." Yes. Fu Wang and Xieze were in charge of different areas. The former was in charge of attack, while the latter was in charge of encirclement and suppression. The two worked together to attack the enemy from the front and back. The night wind was bleak and the shadows of the trees swayed. The numerous shadows seemed to blend into the night. If it was just to destroy the granary, and Shui would only need to send 1,000 men and horses. It would be easy to expose the target if there were too many people, but his goal was to rob the rations to replenish himself. Naturally, he could not have too few troops. Otherwise, even if they robbed the rations, they would not have enough men to transport them away. In order to motivate the three armies, and Shui even gambled and made a bold decision. He decided to lead the troops in a night attack. Of course, this night attack could not be compared to Jiang Pingji's magnificent feat. To put it bluntly, it was to follow in the center of the army. No matter if they advanced or retreated, there would be room. It was the safest. Even so, Shui was somewhat reluctant. After all, not everyone was like Jiang Pingji, a monster who would feel uncomfortable if she did not fight or kill. And Shui valued his own life the most. Why would he risk his life? However, he had no choice but to do this. The morale of the entire army was low. Recently, deserters had been ceaselessly coming in. A rough estimate was that they had lost more than 10,000 low-ranking soldiers. How could he increase morale? After thinking about it, the only way was to go into battle personally. Jiang Pingji's imitation of Lu Zheng's letter was flawless. The rough map given was also real. And Shui led 30,000 carefully selected elites and set off. Along the way they did not discover anything suspicious. As the army went deeper, and Shui's confidence grew exponentially. If we succeed this time, Shaoyin should be rewarded. And Shui sighed with emotion. Even though he and Lu Zheng no longer had feelings for each other, Lu Zheng was still loyal to him and plotted for him in every way. Thinking of their old friendship, and Shui's heart softened a little. He planned to continue using Lu Zheng after he recovered from his illness. Even if Lu Zheng was dissatisfied with him, so what? He was the ruler and Lu Zheng was the subject. The ruler ruled by the subject. Could Lu Zheng overturn the heavens? With this thought in mind, and Shui let down his guard slightly. He could relax, but the others did not dare. After marching for more than 2 hours, half of the night had passed. And Shui and the others finally approached the location of the granary. Are there any abnormalities in the defenses here? And Shui was a paranoid person. Once he discovered anything unusual, he would immediately turn around and leave. Reporting to my lord, there are no abnormalities. Chapter 1682. The heavens knew who the heavens were helping. And Shui's one-sided statement did not count. Unfortunately, no one understood this. The deputy general guarding In Shui cupped his fists and complimented him, making In Shui feel elated. It was as if victory was close at hand. The atmosphere was just right, but there were still people who jumped out to ruin it. And Shui pulled a long face when he heard this. Master, I've heard advisor Lu mention Lu Shi before. The advisor said that Lu Shi is a person who does things with caution. We can't use common sense to judge him. Also, the granary is related to the outcome of the battle. The defenses here must be very strict. Our army needs to be careful and cannot be careless. And Shui's expression darkened. His face grew long and it was frightening to look at. The surrounding soldiers all wanted to hammer that weird person who couldn't read the atmosphere. Instead of saying something auspicious at a time like this, he was bringing bad luck to himself. Was he stupid? The deputy general who had spoken did not feel that he was bringing bad luck. He was doing this for the good of his master. He spoke from the bottom of his heart and was speaking the truth. Good advice was unpleasant to the ear. He had to listen even if he didn't like it. And Shui could only respond with an awkward but polite smile. He remembered this deputy general in his heart. Perhaps it was the influence of this crow's mouth, but in Shui's mood turned from sunny to cloudy. His heart seemed to be shrouded in a haze that could not be dispelled. It was as if something was going to happen soon. He couldn't explain it in detail. Because of this, and Shui was even more dissatisfied with this crow's mouth. And Shui was the master, not the vanguard. Naturally, he wouldn't be at the front lines. He could only judge the situation of the two armies based on his own eyes and the real-time battle reports. When he heard the shouts of killing coming from outside the granary, and Shui knew that the two armies had started fighting. He clenched his fists nervously and gritted his teeth. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. How's the battle situation? And Shui couldn't help but ask again. The results were very gratifying. While the granary's defenses were strong, the number of soldiers and horses stationed there was only a regular number. The overall situation was not too different from the information Lu Zheng had given him. Even though these guards were all elites, they were outnumbered by the enemy. After a while, they would be at a disadvantage. According to the current situation, it was expected that the granary would fall. In order to boost the morale of the troops, the general laughed out loud and mocked. The troops under Lu Shi's tent are just SOSO. I'll take a few more heads. As he listened to the shouts, and Shui's heart, which had been hanging in the air, slowly calmed down. He recalled the wonderful plan Lu Zheng gave him, and the amount of grain stored in the granary that Lu Zheng had deduced based on all kinds of information. He could not help but feel excited. If they could empty this granary, not only would they be able to deal a huge blow to the enemy's morale, but they would also be able to prolong their lives. Send reinforcements and take down the granary as soon as possible to avoid any accidents. This place was very far from the tents of Jiang Pingji's army, but they were also afraid that unforeseen events would occur if they delayed for too long. and Shui was afraid of Jiang Pingji. He always felt that this person was very strange. Every time he gained the upper hand before he could feel proud of himself for a while, the other party would always jump out from all sorts of corners to slap him in the face. Yes, sir. Increase the number of troops and strive to occupy the granary as fast as possible. The granary defense line wouldn't last much longer. As Shui sent reinforcements, the already shaky defense line of the granary collapsed, and the soldiers guarding it scattered in all directions. It's done. Unexpectedly, the unforeseen event happened not long after. While Shui's main army was focused on attacking the granary, two groups of troops circled to the rear, one on the left and one on the right. I've let them be complacent for long enough. It's time to wake up from this sweet dream. Fu Wang revealed a sinister smile. His pair of pitch-black eyes seemed to flicker with a frightening light. He was a wolf child raised by a pack of wolves. The night was a hindrance to others, but to him, it was like a fish in water. Fu Wang waved his hand, and a soldier immediately handed him a quiver of arrows. Disregarding the inhuman Jiang Pingji, Fu Wang's strength was among the best in the army. Fu Wang easily drew his two-pickle heavy bow and released several arrows in unison. The moment the arrows left the bowstring, the archers who had been on standby for a long time drew their bows fully. The small bamboo whistle tied to the arrow shafts flew into the sky, emitting a sharp sound. The whistling arrow was the signal. The soldiers of the archery battalion who had been lying in ambush drew their bows. The first wave of arrows flew towards the enemy. The arrows that Fu Wang shot accurately hit the enemy. Those who were shot only had time to let out their final screams, alerting the other soldiers. What's happening? The night was dark and there were no torches lit in the surroundings. The soldiers who were further away did not see the arrows on the bodies of those who were shot. The soldiers who were closer saw it, but before they could shout out the word, "Enemy attack," the shrill sound of whistling arrows and the buzzing sound of arrows leaving the bowstring arrived one after the other. Fu Wang's side had taken the enemy by surprise. The other group led by Commander Xieze was not to be outdone, and they also caused a commotion. By the time Shui discovered the unusual movements coming from the rear of the army, it was already too late. Report, 2 groups of enemy troops have appeared behind our army. Shui had been immersed in the joy of victory a second ago, but in the next second he was pulled back to reality by the shouts of the messenger. What? Enemy troops? Shui thought he was hearing things. Where did the enemy troops come from? The messenger could only repeat it once. This time Shui heard it clearly, but he was so shocked that his mind went blank. How could there be enemy troops? Jiang Pingji's main camp was at least 14 to 16 hours away from here. Even if she had received news that the granary had been attacked and had grown wings to fly over, she would not make it in time. Unless... Shui had a conjecture that made his limbs go cold. Unless the enemy had planned this beforehand and had predicted that Shui would lead troops to launch a sneak attack, so they had set up an ambush in advance and were only waiting for them to walk right into the trap. Don't panic, my lord. I will repel them right away. The commotion at the rear was not small, but it would take a while for it to reach the front. The vanguard troops who had taken the lead broke through the defensive line. The provisions were right in front of them, and they saw the defeated soldiers fleeing in all directions. Their joy grew even stronger. Lu Shi is nothing more than this. The general of the vanguard laughed heartily as he led his men into the granary. Sure enough, it was filled to the brim with rations. He pulled out the dagger at his waist and cut open the nearest bag of rations. The yellow grains that he had expected did not flow out. Instead, a pile of gravel gushed out. The general's smile froze halfway. His right hand, which was holding the dagger, was trembling. We've fallen into a trap. Order the army to retreat quickly. He shouted at the top of his lungs, but it was still too late. At that moment, more than 2,000 soldiers had already rushed into the granary. The rest did not know what had happened inside. They kept rushing in, so how could they have the time to retreat? Kill! Suddenly the sound of kill surged in from all directions like a tidal wave. The enemy troops who had fled in disorder had returned. Their numbers were many times greater than before. Shui's army was shocked by the word, fall into a trap. The moment the enemy troops arrived, they immediately lost their composure and formation. In the distance, Jiang Pingji looked at the spreading flames in the granary. The corners of her lips curled into a cold smile. Chapter 1683. Yuyita, receiving guests? I should really let the little princesses from the group of little princesses see how stifled their lord is. Fireworks era. It's not just the streamer who's stifled. I've been stifled for a while too. The content of the streaming of swords and blades is more exciting. Of course, I'm not encouraging the streamer to be as unrestrained as before, but it's good to have some fun once in a while. Don't stifle yourself. Qingchen, when I heard the streamer say receiving guests, I couldn't help but think of an alluring madam waving her handkerchief. The sense of déjà vu is too strong. Lao Ciji Lianming, to the previous poster, I think the two have the same effect, because both the streamer and the madam want people's lives. Even the salted fish in the streaming room had been edified into an old salted fish that raced on Mount Qiuming, but a big shot was still a big shot. Her speed was extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, a car flew past. Jiang Pengji blocked the bullet screen and carefully waited for the fish that slipped through the net to crash into her. In comparison, Shui's situation was much more difficult. There were enemy soldiers lying in ambush in front and behind him. This was not the worst. The worst thing was that the morale of the three armies was hanging by a thread. Everyone believed that this operation would be successful and that they would fight with their backs to the wall after the food crisis was resolved. Now that they had been ambushed by the enemy, their last breath was immediately deflated. Their morale had also collapsed. However, in the face of danger, they could only brace themselves and fight for a way out. Only then would there be a possibility of survival. The flames of war spread, and the killing shook the heavens. The morale of Jiang Pingji's side was as high as a rainbow, and Shui's side could only struggle with difficulty. Seeing that the tide was about to turn and that the flames of war were about to spread to Shui's side, Shui was burning with anxiety, but he was powerless. He only hated Jiang Pingji and Lu Zheng, who had presented him with the brilliant plan. Now that he thought about it carefully, it was most likely that Lu Zheng had used the excuse of leaving to seek refuge with Jiang Pingji. He had even used the brilliant plan to deceive Shui into stepping into a trap. This guess was baseless, but Shui could not think of any other possibility. He loved and hated Lu Zheng at the same time. His heart was filled with rage. Shui felt that he had treated Lu Zheng well. Although he had given him the cold shoulder in the past 2 years, he had also ensured that Lu Zheng enjoyed a high position and wealth. He had never done something like burning the bridge after crossing it. He did not expect Lu Zheng to betray him and hook up with Jiang Pingji. Shui kept saying that he trusted LV Zheng and treated him well, but in reality he was biased to the core. Lu Zheng's brilliant plan might not have come from Lu Zheng. Perhaps Lu Zheng had already met with misfortune. Unfortunately, Shui didn't have the chance to think about this. He shouted, "Retreat! Lead the troops and break out of the encirclement." If he was caught, there was no point in fighting the war. The remaining territories of Nanxing would really fall into Jiang Pingji's hands. The group also realized the severity of the situation. They could only try their best to organize a counterattack and break out of the encirclement, attempting to escort Shui out of the encirclement. Even if the soldiers under Jiang Pingji's command were of high quality, they were no match for the enemy's human wave tactic. The soldiers under Shui's command focused on one direction to break out of the encirclement. They managed to tear a hole in the encirclement, but not too long after, the enemy came to fill the gap. Soon the commotion here alarmed Fu Wang. "Report, what's the matter?" Fu Wang spat out a mouthful of blood. With a few slashes he chopped a few obstructing enemies in half. The soldiers reported to Fu Wang that Shui's side was gathering troops to break out of the encirclement, allowing Fu Wang to decide whether to continue intercepting them or go easy on them. The battlefield was so big that it was impossible to take care of every single area. There were bound to be places where troops had to be concentrated, and some places where they had to go easy on them to reduce the overall pressure. They had to use the limited number of troops to deal the greatest blow to the enemy. If they sent troops to fight to the death in one area, the troops in other areas would be thinned out. Even though the morale of Shui's troops was low and their combat ability was not up to par, it did not mean that they would surrender without a fight. For example, Shui's attempt to break out of the encirclement was very stressful. Many soldiers had been sacrificed to stop them. Fu Wang rubbed his chin with his blood-stained palm and muttered to himself. His hands, face, armor, and the warhorse he was riding, lightning chasing, were all stained with someone's blood. He looked as if he had crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was very frightening. When he was deep in thought, his oppressive aura became even stronger. "Ah, looks like it's a big fish." Fu Wang picked up his weapon and urged his horse forward. "What are you waiting for? Grab your weapons and follow me." Fu Wang was a meticulous person despite his coarseness. The morale of Shui's troops was so low that they could not withstand a single blow, but the troops they had gathered to break out of the encirclement had almost torn apart their own army's defensive line. What did this mean? This meant that the person they were protecting had an extraordinary status. The soldiers had to raise their fighting spirit, which was why Fu Wang's side was feeling so pressured. With such a deduction, would Fu Wang let them go so easily? The people on Shui's side were the first to realize that something was wrong. The enemy was targeting them. When he realized this, Shui could not sit still. Riding on his warhorse, he gripped the reins tightly, his face so dark that it seemed as if it would drip water. "Master, the enemy has caught up." Fu Wang and the others were very fast, but because of the darkness, reinforcements could not come as quickly. Shui had managed to temporarily escape danger under the protection of the soldiers. Before they could celebrate, they discovered that the enemy had already caught up. They could only send out some troops to delay the enemy for a while. However, this method was not a long-term solution. On the way to escape, a soldier came up with an idea in a moment of desperation. He suggested that Shui take off his luxurious clothes and change into the tattered clothes of an ordinary soldier. His face would be smeared black, his hair messy, and he would disguise himself as an ordinary soldier. Even if the enemy caught up, Shui would blend into the chaotic army. As long as he did not admit his identity, no one would know that he was Duke Shui. This soldier could then disguise himself as Shui and confuse the enemy's eyes and ears, drawing their people away. This way he could delay them for a while. Although this method was bad, it was a method that did not have a solution. For the sake of his own life, Shui had to agree. When he finished changing, he realized that something was wrong. However, time was of the essence. He did not have the luxury of time to think about it. "Sorry to trouble you, master." The soldier put on the clothes Shui had taken off, scratched his messy hair with his fingers, and turned back on his horse, leading the soldiers to delay the enemy. The soldiers split into two groups. One group would escort Shui to escape, while the other would use themselves as bait to attract the enemy's troops. Fu Wang was not a useless person. In a few moves, he had captured and killed the people on the second group. "General Fu, this is the big fish." The soldiers picked out the best dressed, the tallest, and the one with the most complete armor from among the captives. After identifying the captives, they finally caught the general who had put on Shui's clothes. This was probably the big fish that the enemy was carefully protecting. Fu Wang dismounted, grabbed a torch and walked forward. He used the light to identify the man. "Who is this?" Fu Wang casually poked the torch in front of him, almost burning the man's eyebrows. The general in Shui's tent said, "I am Shui. How dare you?" Holding the torch, Fu Wang froze. He almost cried out, "Is Shui personally leading the troops today? The general?" Chapter 1684. "No, that's not it." The general's face darkened, but it was too late to make up for it. Fu Wang would not listen to his excuses. Fu Wang walked up and used his free hand to violently wipe away the dirt on the general's face. He brought the torch in his right hand closer to examine it. He laughed coldly. "Ignorant child, don't you know that I've seen Shui before?" The general's mouth was bitter. How could he know that Fu Wang had seen Shui before? He had been exposed almost immediately. If that was all, it would have been fine, but he had made an extremely stupid mistake. Even if this ambush was a trap, they could not have known that Shui was personally leading the army. In other words, there was no need for the general to put on Shui's clothes to draw the enemy away. Not only would this not buy time, but it would also expose the fact that Shui was among the fleeing troops, drawing the enemy's pursuit. The correct method should have been for Shui to disguise himself as a fleeing soldier and use the chaos to escape into the dense forest. Only then would he have a chance to escape. In the end, because of the urgency of the situation, he had neglected this point and exposed his lord Shui's existence. Not only that, but this mighty general had seen Shui before. Once Shui was captured, there was basically no hope of escape. Thinking of this, the general was so regretful that he wanted to commit suicide. Fu Wang observed the captive's expression coldly. He had already figured it out. He had lied. Fu Wang had never seen Shui in person, only his portrait. He had lied to deceive the captive. Man. Fu Wang suppressed the wild joy in his heart. If he could capture Shui alive, how great of a contribution would that be? All men were ambitious and Fu Wang was no exception. The general heard the commotion and hurried forward to receive orders. Fu Wang ordered him to send more men to hunt down the fleeing fish. You go first, I'll follow soon. Military merit was very attractive, but Fu Wang would not abandon the battlefield for military merit. What if he accidentally tricked Xieze? The general was ordered to retreat. When Enchui's general heard this, his vision darkened and he almost fainted. Fu Wang glanced disdainfully at the captured enemy general. He was stupid, but he still thought himself clever. It was time for him to train his brain. The deputy general had been Fu Wang's right-hand man for many years. He had once followed Fu Wang's adoptive father, Fu Yang, when he was young. Now he was also an experienced and prudent old man. Fu Wang was completely at ease, leaving the heavy responsibility of pursuing Enchui to him. Even if Si Jiang could not catch Enchui, he would not let Enchui escape so easily. Once Fu Wang settled the situation on this side, he would quickly catch up to them. Fu Wang's plan was undoubtedly very comprehensive, but he had forgotten one thing. His lord was focused on snatching the kill. On the other side of the story, Enchui disguised himself as an ordinary soldier and was running for his life on horseback. There wasn't much light in the dark night. They could barely see the small path, but they couldn't see the specific road. Thus this escape route was very bumpy. Under the whipping of the horse, the warhorse galloped forward with all its might. The oncoming night wind slapped against its face, causing it to hurt. Enchui felt like vomiting from the jolting, but he didn't dare to stop the whip. He could only endure the paleness of his face and continue. Hiya! Enchui whipped the warhorse under him again. The warhorse neighed in pain. Its front hooves suddenly missed their footing, and its strong body fell forward. They didn't know what it had touched, but the horse's leg made a bone-cracking sound. The warhorse's body fell heavily to the ground due to inertia. Enchui was also thrown backward by the force of the fall. He rolled on the ground twice, his teeth scraping against the skin of his mouth. The thick taste of blood spread in his mouth. The others couldn't care less about the half-dead warhorse. They hurriedly pulled on the reins to stop the warhorse and dismounted to help Enchui up. Enchui's luck was pretty good. Even after such a heavy fall, he had only loosened his front teeth, seen stars, and suffered some superficial wounds. If he had been unlucky, his organs might have been displaced by the weight of the warhorse. My lord! My lord! Cries of my lord rang out in Enchui's ears. Enchui took a few deep breaths before he managed to regain his composure. He felt like he was standing on solid ground. When he thought back to the dangerous scene just now, he was very flustered. He had almost thought that he was going to die. I'm fine. Time is of the essence, let's leave as soon as possible. Enchui raised a hand and wiped his face heavily. He accidentally pressed down on the bruises on his face, and the pain made him suck in a cold breath. This general has offended you. A certain general helped Enchui onto his warhorse. After he was seated properly, he flipped himself onto the horse. He grabbed the reins and lashed out with his whip. The fleeing group that had stopped set off once again. Everyone's hearts were in their throats. They didn't dare to stop. Even so, they had still been discovered by the enemy. The sound of hooves behind them was getting closer. The two sides were in hot pursuit, and the distance between them was very close. When the sound of hooves entered Enchui's ears, it didn't sound like they were stepping on the ground, but more like they were stepping on his heart to hasten his death. Chase them, they're right ahead. Hiya! The hooves of the horses stomped on the ground, causing the sand on the ground to tremble slightly as if an earthquake had occurred. This scene reminded Enchui of his great escape experience in the past. At that time he had also been riding on a horse that he had stolen. He had whipped the horse with all his might in an attempt to shake off the southern barbarian soldiers who were chasing after him. He had been chased so hard that he couldn't breathe. He didn't have the energy to recall the tragic deaths of his parents, wives, concubines, and children. There was only one thought left in his mind: escape, survive, and take revenge. In the end, he had been shot 3 times in the back by the enemy. While unconscious, he had jumped into the fast-flowing river and luckily escaped with his life. When the ice-cold river water had submerged his head, his brocade clothes had absorbed all the water, and his exhausted body had flowed along with the river water, he had thought that he was dead for sure. After experiencing a long period of darkness, he had woken up despite his tenacity. Dragging his body full of injuries, he had tried his best to leave Nanxing. In the first half of his life, Enchui had been a nobleman who had enjoyed a life of luxury. He had never had to do any chores. However, during the few years he had been on the run, Enchui had suffered countless hardships and had struggled on the edge of life and death several times. Every time he had wanted to give up, but the nightmares would always remind him of the tragic deaths of his wife, children, and parents, stirring up the indignation and hatred in his heart. In the end he had gone into exile in Dongqing. Many years had passed, and Shui had thought that the most difficult days were far away from him. He hadn't expected that he would have the chance to relive them today. Back then he had been fortunate enough to survive. In the end, he had made a comeback and destroyed the southern barbarians to take revenge. If he could escape today, he might be able to create another miracle. And Shui harbored such thoughts. His silent eyes seemed to be burning with two clusters of flames. Whether it was Lu Zheng who had betrayed him, Jiang Pingji who had stopped him, or Hua Yuan who had secretly disobeyed him, and Shui was immersed in his own emotions when he suddenly heard the voice of the general under the tent. It was just a few words, but they were like the sounds of nature. "My lord, we've shaken off our pursuers." "That's great." Chapter 1685. Jiang Pingji had discovered Shui's existence a long time ago. Just as she had expected, the other party had chosen her direction in a panic when they were escaping. Everything was as perfect as he had planned. "My lord, the front line has already started fighting. Should I send troops to support the generals?" The general who spoke used to be Yang Tao's subordinate. Of course he was now Jiang Pingji's man. Currently he was mainly responsible for protecting Jiang Pingji. To put it bluntly, he was the leader of the security team. Combat was secondary. Although this position was not very close to the battlefield, it was related to Jiang Pingji's safety. Only her trusted subordinates could take up the post. Sitting in this position not only meant that he had Jiang Pingji's trust, but it also meant that he could make his presence felt in front of the new master. His future was bright. Regarding Jiang Pingji's trust and importance, not only was this person extremely touched, but the old officials of Yang Tao also completely submitted to her and no longer had any suspicions. After all, if Jiang Pingji was really suspicious of Yang Tao's old officials, she would not entrust her own safety to Yang Tao's faction. This was an analysis from an outsider's point of view. Only Jiang Pingji and the audience in the streaming room knew the truth. Her battle prowess was too tyrannical, and most of the guards were just decorations, completely useless. It didn't matter who sat in this position. If promoting the old officials of Yang Tao's faction could make the internal affairs more harmonious, Jiang Pingji didn't mind making them feel touched for a while longer. "No need. Let them fight. We have a more important mission." Jiang Pingji spat out the dog's tail grass in her mouth and mounted the horse. She said sternly, "Gather the troops and follow me. I'm afraid there's a big fish today. I'm counting on him for supper tonight." The big fish Jiang Pingji was referring to was naturally Shui. She was the lord and the people around her had to listen to her. They would go wherever she wanted them to go. The captain of the security team obeyed the order and went to gather the troops. After a while he came back with some excitement in his eyes. He had long heard of how powerful this lord was. She was the chosen one, so following her would definitely not go wrong. The dark night posed no obstacle to Jiang Pingji. Her spirit was firmly locked onto Shui. She calculated his route of advance and arrived at his destination early, waiting for him to walk right into her trap. The terrain here was relatively flat, and there was a shallow pool not far away, so there were mosquitoes everywhere. "Your Highness, we are here too." The captain of the security team hesitated. There were so many mosquitoes here. Were they here to feed the mosquitoes? Even though he was wearing a mighty and heavy armor with thick clothes underneath, he still couldn't stop those little fellows from invading his body. Not long after, he felt the back of his hand itch a little. He swatted at the mosquitoes with his other hand and killed 3 of them at once. The leader of the security team grimaced, but he did not dare to spit at Jiang Pingji. He did not want to provoke her. He couldn't help but mutter. His lord was dressed tightly, but her skin was soft and tender. Those mosquitoes should like her more, right? Squatting in such a place, he was actually able to maintain his composure and straighten his back, as expected of someone with firm confidence. Little did they know that no mosquito dared to bite Jiang Pingji. She had been fishing for more than 10 years and had not caught a single mosquito. It could be seen how afraid the animals were of her. Which mosquito would dare to bite her? According to salted fish in the streaming room, Jiang Pingji's blood was as poisonous as her person. "They're almost here." Jiang Pingji placed her left hand on the hilt of the god-slaying saber at her waist. "What's coming?" Just as the leader of the security team finished speaking, he faintly felt the ground tremble slightly. He listened attentively and seemed to hear the vague sound of hooves. Very soon he knew what was coming. The sound of hundreds of hooves was getting closer and closer. The leader of the security team was so shocked that he could not close his mouth. Because they were prepared, and Jiang Pingji used the reeds on the beach as cover, the enemy did not notice them at all. If she had not ordered the archers to attack first and reap a wave of heads, and Chui and the others would probably only realize that something was wrong when they were face to face with Jiang Pingji, the rain of arrows in front of them caught them off guard. The cavalrymen at the front fell off their horses one after another. They only had time to let out a short scream. Isn't it a pleasure to have a friend come from afar? Jiang Pingji drew out the god-slaying saber at her waist. The snow-white blade was extremely eye-catching in the dark night. It was as if the blade did not reflect the moonlight but glowed on its own. Duoshi, we haven't seen each other for many years. Do you still remember me? It's not easy to meet an old friend. Duoshi, why don't you stay for a cup of tea and catch up? Why are you in such a hurry? Even though she was speaking ingratiatingly, the murderous intent emanating from her body was so obvious that even a blind man could sense it. Jiang Pingji's voice was not too loud. She was also a distance away from Chui. Logically speaking, the latter should not have been able to hear her. In the end, not only did Chui hear her clearly, but the defeated soldiers around him also heard her clearly. Everyone had different reactions, but there was one thing that they all had a common understanding of: terror. Chui's breathing was heavy. The joy of escaping had not even passed when the soul-reaping envoy followed closely behind and blocked the way out. He used a hoarse and venomous voice, almost squeezing Jiang Pingji's name out of his molars. Lu Shi, and Chui was like an angry and heavily injured beast. He paced back and forth in his cage anxiously, his eyes filled with murderous intent. As Chui shouted these two words, the soldiers who heard the commotion panicked. Lu Shi, this name had been with them since the beginning of the war like a shadow. They could not help but feel a headache when they heard it, let alone when they saw him in person. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, Duoshi, you still remember me. And Chui's breathing became even heavier. How could he not remember? Could it be that today was the day of his death? Would this be his burial ground? No. He would not die and he would not lose either. And Chui took a deep breath and said, Lu Shi, you guard your Dongqing and I'll guard my Nanxing. We'll mind our own business. If there are foreign enemies in the future, we can still help each other. Why must you be so ruthless? Nanxing is not as simple as you think. In the end, I'm afraid the losses outweigh the gains. As he spoke, Chui gave the general beside him a look. The general understood and retreated a little on his horse, hiding behind the people. He held his bow and knocked an arrow, closed his eyes, and determined Jiang Pingji's position based on the sound. This person was a famous archer in Chui's tent. Determining the location of a target by listening to the sound was his specialty. The night was dark and the distance between them was a little far. If he drew his bow and shot an arrow, it would be extremely difficult for the enemy to discover him. Jiang Pingji could not help but be amused. The two families had fought to this point and would not rest until one side was dead. Did Chui think he could persuade her with just a few words? What do you mean by, I guard my Dongqing and you guard your Nanxing? Jiang Pingji said strangely, Dongqing is mine but Nanxing is not yours. My ambition is to rule the world and Nanxing will be mine in the end. On account of our friendship in the past, I can point out a bright path for you. And Duoshi, if you lead your troops and pledge allegiance to me, I'll confer you the title of Duke Anil. You'll enjoy a lifetime of glory, splendor, and wealth. As soon as he finished speaking, the archer had already shot an arrow from the dark. The bowstring buzzed softly, and the arrow pierced through the air. And Chui's heart leaped into his throat. Chapter 1686. My leg. The sudden pain made Chui cry out in pain. The warhorse he was riding neighed loudly because of it. Sometimes it raised its front hooves and sometimes it kicked its hind legs. The more violently it moved, the deeper the arrowhead buried in the horse's body, tearing and stirring its flesh. Fresh blood flowed from the wound. The warhorse was startled and jumped around. The person on the horse suffered even more. And Chui was even more unlucky. He was thrown off the horse for the second time. If someone hadn't grabbed his collar when he fell off the horse, he would have suffered a concussion. Of course, Chui's center of gravity wasn't on the warhorse. The pain in his thigh was even more acute, occupying all of his attention. Chui's entire face was contorted in pain. It looked hideous and terrifying. To reduce the pain, he raised his hand and grabbed the cloth around the wound on his thigh. He used so much strength that he almost tore the cloth into pieces. His 5 knuckles were pale from the excessive force. In stark contrast was blood. Warm, sticky blood stained Chui's palm. The red and white contrasted, making the white look whiter and the red look redder. This scene happened in an instant. Before many people could react, and Shui had already fallen to the ground howling in pain. Thus, someone reprimanded him sternly, "Lu Shi, you're a feudal lord. You're so sinister and cunning. How dare you stab someone in the back?" Jiang Pingji laughed coldly. She was becoming more and more aloof, but the salted fish in the streaming room couldn't tolerate it. Was their streamer someone who could be slandered by any trash? Kuang Xiai Mo sure, a thief calling a thief is probably this kind of person. 5 million salted fish have seen it. How can you distort the truth? Dong Dong Xiao Hua Kai, this kind of trash isn't worth the streamer's saliva to defend. This double standard is really unsightly. At your grave mound jumping disco, the point isn't this double standard trash. The point is that the streamer just caught the arrow in the back with her bare hands and threw it back. 1 word, the super invincible thunderbolt hottie. 2 words, so handsome that I can't close my legs. Pu Sisi, it's a godlike maneuver. I was worried for the streamer just now. I didn't expect her to throw a slap back at me. Our spicy streamer is handsome to a new height every time. That scene just now was so noble and cool that he had no friends. Lao Ciji Lianming, a straightforward person doesn't beat around the bush. I want to be ked by the streamer until my legs turn to jelly. Number Bai, I didn't expect you to be so experienced. Tudu Feichio, I didn't expect you to be such a big boss. Count me in. In this era where men were becoming more and more exquisite and young ladies were becoming more and more majestic, Jiang Pingji was simply the lover of the masses. The host's arms were the harbor where they could fight for their entire lives. Not only did this scene cause Shui and the others to be in a frenzy and speak indiscriminately, but the leader of the security team beside Jiang Pingji was also so angry that his eyes were about to split open. It was impossible to defend against the enemy's sneak attack. Even though it wasn't aimed at Jiang Pingji's face, it was still dangerous to aim at her. If she was shot, she would be seriously injured even if she didn't die. They were heartless and unjust, launching a sneak attack first, and now they actually had the cheek to make a false accusation? And Shui had purposely conversed with his lord to attract everyone's attention, then secretly shot an arrow. Was this a gentleman? T about your ancestors. The leader of the security team was a middle-aged man in his 30s who was nearing his 40s. When he scolded, his voice was like rolling thunder. He had cultivated his body and mind for many years. Now that he had failed, he wished he could roll up his sleeves and chop up his enemies to feed to the dogs. You are despicable and shameless. I feel so ashamed on behalf of you sons of bitches. Jiang Pingji couldn't help but roll her eyes. She said softly with a smile, if you want to scold others, just scold them. Why do you have to scold yourselves? He called them sons of bitches and called himself, but wasn't the father of a son of a bitch also a tortoise? The leader of the security team was speechless. Don't argue with him at a time like this. Whose side are you on, my lord? Why waste your breath? Tie them up and beat them however you want. I want to see if they have any other part of their bodies that's hard except for their mouths, Jiang Pingji said with a cold smile. That body of worthless bones? Maybe it's not as durable as that thing under their abdomen. The leader of the security team cupped his fists and said, Yes, my lord. And Chui's thigh had been pierced by an arrow, and he had been thrown off his horse. He was in so much pain that he almost lost consciousness. Everyone wanted to escape with such a burden, but they couldn't keep up with Jiang Pingji's fast horse. They were all captured after a few moments of struggling. It was a one-sided battle that had no suspense. Jiang Pingji looked down at Shui, who was tied up and had cold sweat dripping from his forehead. She said coldly, Back then, I was able to save you from the snow-covered land. Now I can take your life here. I gave you a way out just now, but you didn't take it. You just want to die. What? And Shui was in so much pain that his lips turned white. Not to mention moving his injured thigh, even breathing would affect his wound. With difficulty, he revealed a mocking smile and said, Lu Lanting, why do you need to pretend to be benevolent and righteous? No matter how I pretend to be benevolent and righteous, didn't I let you drag out an ignoble existence for so many years? You should be deeply grateful. Jiang Pingji raised her foot and used the tip of her shoe to grind against the area near his wound. And Shui screamed in pain again, but she lectured him expressionlessly, a drop of water should be repaid with a spring of water. And Dwashi, this is called repaying a cold arrow. Whether it's a blessing or a curse, you have to bear it yourself. When the captured minister of Shui saw how Jiang Pingji had humiliated him, he was so angry that smoke almost came out of his head. All sorts of expletives came out of his mouth. Jiang Pingji admired these people with backbone, so she gave them a quick death by beheading them with a single slash of her sword. Many people were so shocked that they shut their mouths when they saw the man who had been cursing and swearing a second ago roll his head on the ground the next second. Winner takes all. Why don't you just accept your fate and admit defeat? You win fair and square and you lose fair and square. Only the incompetent will bark like crazy. Jiang Pingji didn't even look at the man, but the effect was outstanding. Only those who were observant noticed that the man Jiang Pingji had just beheaded was the man who had secretly shot an arrow at Shui. Such a streamer had no soul if she didn't take revenge. Shui endured the excruciating pain and said, "Lu Shi, you want me to admit defeat? Why don't you just kill me?" Jiang Pingji took the handkerchief from the leader of the security team and slowly wiped the blood off the blade of the god-slaying sword. "You're stubborn and unwilling to admit defeat, so I naturally won't spare you. But you're a feudal lord after all. Isn't it a waste of your talent to die here? No matter what, I have to make proper preparations and send you on your way with a bang, shouldn't I?" Jiang Pingji sheathed the god-slaying sword. Everyone had personally witnessed Jiang Pingji's eloquence. She could make people want to die at any moment. "Tie them all up and reward them according to their contributions when we return." The leader of the security team beamed with joy and said in a loud voice, "Yes, sir." Chapter 1687. My lord, someone's coming? The leader of the security team tensed up and ordered the soldiers to be on standby. Just as they finished packing Shui and the others up, they noticed a group of people rushing towards them. The leader of the security team was worried that it was Shui's reinforcements. They didn't have many men on their side. If they really fought, they would easily be at a disadvantage. However, Jiang Pingji wasn't worried, because this group of people was none other than the pursuing troops that Shui and the others had shaken off not long ago. Fu Wang had just met up with them. When Fu Wang heard that General Shui had lost Shui, he was furious. He wanted nothing more than to capture them and beat them up to vent his anger. It was infuriating to lose such an important, fat fish. Fortunately, the enemy had fled in such a hurry that there was no time to erase any clues. They could follow the traces all the way. Halfway through the chase, the vanguard discovered that someone was blocking the road ahead. He immediately reported to Fu Wang, "General Fu, there are people ahead, but it doesn't seem like an ambush." When Fu Wang heard this, he raised his hand to tighten the reins. He sighed, and the well-trained warhorse quickly came to a halt. "Doesn't seem like an ambush? Go and ask them which battalion they are from." There were tens of millions of people participating in the battle. Although the troops of the various battalions were in contact, the battlefield was chaotic and news traveled slowly. Fu Wang couldn't know every place and every person's movements. If the people ahead were not Shui, then they were other troops in the army. It was late at night, and it wasn't convenient for them to use battle flags to distinguish between friend and foe. It was better to understand the situation before deciding on their next move. Perhaps Xieze had also discovered Shui's deserter and had specially sent people to capture him. When the vanguard received Fu Wang's order, he rode forward and asked loudly, "I am General Fu Wang's subordinate. What are you waiting for?" When the leader of the security team heard this, his tense nerves relaxed, and a hint of joy appeared on his face. "My lord, so it's General Fu Wang's men." Jiang Pingji didn't smile. Instead, she revealed a trace of embarrassment. She seemed to have accidentally stolen Fu Wang's victory, causing the credit to fly away from his hands. "Go and tell him that I'm here." "Yes, my lord." The leader of the security team hadn't realized that he had stolen the victory. "General Fu Wang is here. Hurry and pay your respects." The leader of the security team was in charge of Jiang Pingji's security. Naturally, he would interact with Fu Wang. Both of them were familiar with each other's voices. Hearing this voice, Fu Wang knew that the person in front of him was his lord. Half of his worried heart was relieved. The other half was naturally Shui, whose whereabouts were unknown. If the lord knew that he had lost track of the enemy's leader, not to mention a reward, it would be good enough if he didn't suffer. Fu Wang braced himself and led his men forward. He dismounted from his horse when he was still 2 to 3 feet away from Jiang Pingji and walked forward. Both sides lit up their torches. With the light dispelling the darkness, they could finally see each other clearly. General Fu Wang greets the lord. Fu Wang put away his weapon and bowed. He was a little nervous. Jiang Pingji raised her hand to help him up. Her lips curled into an awkward but polite smile. "No need to be so polite, Jingtu. Are you here for Shui?" Fu Wang was stunned. He didn't know how his lord knew, but he quickly understood Jiang Pingji's meaning from her expression. "Master, What you did was too unethical. Fu Wang felt wronged. He still wanted to say it out loud. Jiang Pengji coughed softly and said, "The fire in the granary rose to the sky. I was worried, so I brought some people over to take a look, but I met them halfway." The captain of the security team listened silently and silently refuted in his heart. How could it be a spur-of-the-moment thing? They had clearly come prepared, and they had specifically come to stop Shui. Fu Wang could not say anything bad about his lord. If she brought up the matter of him losing Shui, he would not be able to get away with it. Thus, the pitiful Fu Wang could only silently accept the fact that his lord had snatched his kill. He could only hold back his tears of blood. He couldn't vent his anger on his master, but he could vent it on Shui. If it wasn't for the fact that this old fellow was so good at running, Fu Wang would have caught him long ago. Would it have been his lord's turn to snatch his head? "My lord, where's Shui?" Jiang Pingji pointed her thumb behind her and pouted. "He's lying there half dead. I'll take care of him when we get back." Fu Wang said, "Is Shui willing to submit?" If he submitted, Fu Wang would probably be so depressed that he would vomit blood. He did not want to see Shui continue to jump around. Jiang Pingji made sarcastic remarks. Her mouth was as poisonous as ever. "Him? He won't turn back even if he hits a brick wall. He's very arrogant." Fu Wang could tell that his lord did not like Shui either. Unless Shui shamelessly stuck to her, she would not ask him to surrender. "This place is too close to the front lines. To avoid accidental injuries, please allow me to send someone to escort you back to the camp." Jiang Pingji did not reject Fu Wang's suggestion. Anyway, Shui had already been captured. She was not interested in the other small fries. "Okay, let's go back to the camp." Shui had been captured. It was a good opportunity to destroy the enemy's nest in one go. She did not want to miss such a good opportunity. Jiang Pingji captured Shui along with a few key personnel. Her words stirred up 1,000 ripples. Yang Si was so shocked that he almost jumped out of his bed. "Wait, who did you say you caught?" Yang Si was stunned. Was he dreaming and hadn't woken up yet? The person had no choice but to repeat himself. "The enemy's leader, Shui, has been captured. My lord is waiting in the main tent for the military counselor to go over and discuss it." Yang Si wiped his face hard. All his drowsiness had disappeared. Shui had been captured. This was too exciting. He had the feeling that he had drunk too much and that everything was over when he woke up from his drunken stupor. Feng Zhen and the others had similar thoughts. Almost all of them were dumbfounded. They quickly changed their clothes and hurriedly rushed to the main tent. When Wei Ci heard the news, he was still awake. Not only was he not shocked, but he had a feeling that it had finally come. "Please wait for a moment. Rong Ci, tidy up your attire so that you won't be disrespectful in front of others." He washed up and tidied up unhurriedly. His calm eyes carried a vague sense of relief. Ever since he had been reborn, he had known that this day would come sooner or later. When Shui had been defeated and killed, Wei Ci had still been imprisoned. When he saw the light of day again, his old master's corpse had long been speckled and cold. Considering that he had been his lord's subject in his previous life, he should go and see him one last time. Because the tent was located relatively close to the main tent, it was not too late for Wei Ci to wash up and head over. Half of the people in the tent had yet to arrive. After a quarter of an hour, the people arrived one after another. Fu Wang and Xie Zhe, the two heroes who had rendered meritorious service, opened the tent and sat in their seats, their bodies covered in blood. As soon as the two of them sat down, someone bowed to them and congratulated them. They had achieved a great victory in this battle. Military merits would not be able to escape. Xie Zhe turned his head and chatted happily with Li Yun. He looked disheveled, but his eyes were bright. People were in high spirits when faced with happy events. Only Fu Wang smiled bitterly to himself. He had been greatly wronged today. As he was thinking, his lord walked out from behind the screen and sat upright. Everyone could not help but straighten their backs. The meeting began. Those who were distracted, those who were miserly, those who were eating snacks, and those who were laughing and joking all became serious. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.